The Robots of Dawn by Isaac Asimov. Narrated by Bob Askey. Chapter 7. Again Fastoff. 27. Baley emerged from Gladia's house into the sunset. He turned toward what he assumed must be the western horizon and found Aurora's sun, a deep scarlet in color, topped by thin strips of ruddy clouds set in an apple-green sky. Jehoshaphat, he murmured. Clearly, Aurora's sun, cooler and more orange than Earth's sun, accentuated the difference at setting when its light passed through a greater thickness of Aurora. Daniil was behind him, Giscard as before, well in front. Daniil's voice was in his ear. "Are you well, partner Elijah?" "Quite well," said Baley, pleased with himself. "I'm handling the outside well, Daniil. I can even admire the sunset. Is it always like this?" Daniil gazed dispassionately at the setting sun and said, "Yes, but let us move quickly toward Dr. Fastoff's establishment. At this time of year the twilight does not last long, partner Elijah, and I would wish you there while you can still see easily." "I'm ready. Let's go." Baley wondered if it might not be better to wait for the darkness. It would not be pleasant not to see, but then it would give him the illusion of being enclosed, and he was not in his heart sure as to how long this euphoria induced by admiring a sunset, mind you, outside, would last. But that was a cowardly uncertainty, and he would not own up to it. Giscard noiselessly drifted backward toward him and said, "Would you prefer to wait, sir? Would the darkness suit you better? We ourselves will not be discommoded." Baley became aware of other robots farther off on every side. Had Gladia marked off her field robots for guard duty? Or had Fastoff sent his? It accentuated the way they were all caring for him, and perversely he would not admit to weakness. He said, "No, we'll go now," and struck off at a brisk walk toward Fastoff's establishment, which he could just see through the distant trees. Let the robots follow or not, as they wished, he thought boldly. He knew that if he let himself think about it, there would be something within him that would still quail at the thought of himself on the outer skin of a planet with no protection but air between himself and the great void. But he would not think of it. It was the exhilaration at being free of the fear that made his jaws tremble and his teeth click. Or was it the cool wind of evening that did it, and that also set the goose-flesh to appearing on his arms? It was not the outside. It was not. He said, trying to unclench his teeth, "How well did you know Jander, Daniil?" Daniil said, "We were together for some time. From the time of friend Jander's construction till he passed into the establishment of Miss Gladia, we were together steadily." "Did it bother you, Daniil, that Jander resembled you so closely?" "No, sir. He and I each knew ourselves apart, partner Elijah, and Dr. Fastoff did not mistake us either. We were therefore two individuals." "And could you tell them apart, too, Giscard?" They were closer to him now, perhaps because the other robots had taken over the long-distance duties. Giscard said, "There was no occasion, as I recall, on which it was important that I do so." "And if there had been, Giscard?" "Then I could have done so." "What was your opinion of Jander, Daniil?" Daniil said, "My opinion, partner Elijah? Concerning what aspect of Jander do you wish my opinion?" "Did he do his work well, for instance?" "Certainly." "Was he satisfactory in every way?" "In every way, to my knowledge." "How about you, Giscard? What is your opinion?" Giscard said, "I was never as close to friend Jander as friend Daniil was, and it would not be proper for me to state an opinion. I can say that, to my knowledge, Dr. Fastoff was uniformly pleased with friend Jander. He seemed equally pleased with friend Jander and with friend Daniil. However, I do not think my programming is such as to allow me to offer certainty in such matters." Baley said, "What about the period after Jander entered the household of Miss Gladia? Did you know him then, Daniil?" "No, partner Elijah. Miss Gladia kept him at her establishment. On those occasions when she visited Dr. Fastoff, he was never with her as far as I was aware. On occasions when I accompanied Dr. Fastoff on a visit to Miss Gladia's establishment, I did not see friend Jander." Baley felt a little surprised at that. He turned to Giscard in order to ask the same question, paused, and then shrugged. He was not really getting anywhere, and as Dr. Fastoff had indicated earlier, there is not really much use in cross-examining a robot. They would not knowingly say anything that would harm a human being, nor could they be badgered, bribed, or cajoled into it. They would not openly lie, but they would remain stubbornly, if politely, insistent on giving useless answers. And perhaps it no longer mattered. They were at Fastolf's doorstep now, and Baley felt his breath quickening. The trembling of his arms and lower lip, he was confident, was indeed only because of the cool wind. The sun had gone now. A few stars were visible. The sky was darkening to an odd greenish purple that made it seem bruised, and he passed through the door into the warmth of the glowing walls. He was safe. Fastolf greeted him. "You are back in good time, Mr. Baley. Was your session with Gladia fruitful?" Baley said, "Quite fruitful, Dr. Fastolf. It is even possible that I hold the key to the answer in my hand." 28. Fastolf merely smiled politely, in a way that signaled neither surprise, elation, nor disbelief. He led the way into what was obviously a dining room, a smaller and friendlier one than the one in which they had had lunch. "You and I, my dear Mr. Baley," said Fastolf pleasantly, "will eat an informal dinner alone, merely the two of us. We will even have the robots absent, if that will please you, nor shall we talk business unless you desperately want to." Baley said nothing, but paused to look at the walls in astonishment. They were a wavering, luminous green, with differences in brightness and in tint that were slowly progressive from bottom to top. There was a hint of fronds of deeper green, and shadowy flickers this way and that. The walls made the room appear to be a well-lit grotto at the bottom of a shallow arm of the sea. The effect was vertiginous. At least Baley found it so. Fastolf had no trouble interpreting Baley's expression. He said, "It's an acquired taste, Mr. Baley, I admit. Giscard, subdue the wall illumination. Thank you." Baley drew a breath of relief. "And thank you, Dr. Fastolf. May I visit the personal, sir?" "But of course." Baley hesitated. "Could you—" Fastolf chuckled. "You'll find it perfectly normal, Mr. Baley. You will have no complaints." Baley bent his head. "Thank you very much." Without the intolerable make-believe, the personal, he believed it to be the same one he had used earlier in the day, was merely what it was, a much more luxurious and hospitable one than he had ever seen. It was incredibly different from those on Earth, which were rows of identical units stretching indefinitely, each ticked off for use by one, and only one individual at a time. It gleamed, somehow, with hygienic cleanliness. Its outermost molecular layer might have been peeled off after every use and a new layer laid on. Obscurely, Baley felt that if he stayed on Aurora long enough, he would find it difficult to readjust himself to Earth's crowds, which forced hygiene and cleanliness into the background, something to pay a distant obeisance to, a not quite attainable ideal. Baley, standing there surrounded by conveniences of ivory and gold, not real ivory, no doubt, nor real gold, gleaming and smooth, suddenly found himself shuddering at Earth's casual exchange of bacteria, and wincing at its richness in infectivity. Was that not what the spacers felt? Could he blame them? He washed his hands thoughtfully, playing with the tiny touches here and there along the control strip in order to change the temperature. And yet these Aurorans were so unnecessarily garish in their interior decorations, so insistent in pretending they were living in a state of nature when they had tamed nature and broken it. Or was that only Fastolf? After all, Gladia's establishment had been far more austere. Or was that only because she had been brought up on Solaria? The dinner that followed was an unalloyed delight. Again, as at lunch, there was the distinct feeling of being closer to nature. The dishes were numerous, each different, each in small portions, and in a number of cases it was possible to see that they had once been part of plants and animals. He was beginning to look upon the inconveniences, the occasional small bone, bit of gristle, strand of fiber, which might have repelled him earlier, as a bit of adventure. The first course was a little fish that one ate whole, with whatever internal organs it might have, and that struck him at first sight as another foolish way of rubbing one's nose in nature with a capital N. But he swallowed the little fish anyway, as Fastolf did, and the taste converted him at once. He had never experienced anything like it. It was as though taste buds had suddenly been invented and inserted in his tongue. Tastes changed from dish to dish, and some were distinctly odd and not entirely pleasant, but he found it didn't matter. The thrill of a distinct taste, of different distinct tastes, at Fastolf's instruction he took a sip of faintly flavored water between dishes, was what counted. and not the inner detail. He tried not to gobble, nor to concentrate his attention entirely on the food, nor to lick his plate. Desperately, he continued to observe and imitate Fastoff, and to ignore the other's kindly but definitely amused glance. "I trust," said Fastoff, "you find this to your taste?" "Quite good," Baley managed to choke out. "Please don't force yourself into useless politeness. Do not eat anything that seems strange or unpalatable to you. I will have additional helpings of anything you do like brought in its place." "Not necessary, Dr. Fastoff. It is all rather satisfactory." "Good." Despite Fastoff's offer to eat without robots present, it was a robot who served. Fastoff, accustomed to this, probably did not even notice the fact, Baley thought, and he did not bring the matter up. As was to be expected, the robot was silent, and his motions were flawless. His handsome livery seemed to be out of historical dramas that Baley had seen on hyperwave. It was only at very close view that one could see how much the costume was an illusion of the lighting, and how close the robot exterior was to a smooth metal finish, and no more. Baley said, "Has the waiter's surface been designed by Gladia?" "Yes," said Fastoff, obviously pleased. "How complimented she will feel to know that you recognized her touch. She is good, isn't she? Her work is coming into increasing popularity, and she fills a useful niche in Auroran society." Conversation throughout the meal had been pleasant but unimportant. Baley had had no urge to talk business, and had in fact preferred to be largely silent while enjoying the meal and leaving it to his unconscious, or whatever faculty took over in the absence of hard thought, to decide on how to approach the matter that seemed to him now to be the central point of the gender problem. Fastoff took the matter out of his hands, rather, by saying, "And now that you've mentioned Gladia, Mr. Baley, may I ask how it came about that you left for her establishment rather deep in despair, and have returned almost buoyant, and speaking of perhaps having the key to the whole affair in your hand? Did you learn something new and unexpected, perhaps, at Gladia's?" "That I did," said Baley absently, but he was lost in the dessert which he could not recognize at all, and of which, after some yearning in his eyes had acted to inspire the waiter, a second small helping was placed before him. He felt replete. He had never in his life so enjoyed the act of eating, and for the first time found himself resenting the physiological limits that made it impossible to eat forever. He felt rather ashamed of himself that he should feel so. "And what was it learned that was new and unexpected?" asked Fastoff with quiet patience. "Presumably something I didn't know myself?" "Perhaps. Gladia told me that you had given Jander to her about half a year ago." Fastoff nodded. "I knew that, so I did." Baley said sharply, "Why?" The amiable look on Fastoff's face faded slowly. Then he said, "Why not?" Baley said, "I don't know why not, Dr. Fastoff. I don't care. My question is why." Fastoff shook his head slightly and said nothing. Baley said, "Dr. Fastoff, I am here in order to straighten out what seems to be a miserable mess. Nothing you have done, nothing, has made things simple. Rather, you have taken what seems to be pleasure in showing me how bad a mess it is, and in destroying any speculation I may advance as a possible solution. Now, I don't expect others to answer my questions. I have no official standing on this world and have no right to ask questions, let alone force answers. You, however, are different. I am here at your request, and I am trying to save your career as well as mine. And according to your own account of matters, I am trying to save Aurora as well as Earth. Therefore, I expect you to answer my questions fully and truthfully. Please don't indulge in stalemating tactics, such as asking me why not when I ask why. Now, once again, and for the last time, why?" Fastoff thrust out his lips and looked grim. "My apologies, Mr. Baley. If I hesitated to answer, it is because, looking back on it, it seems there is no very dramatic reason. Gladia Delmar— no, she doesn't want her surname used— Gladia is a stranger on this planet. She has undergone traumatic experiences on her homeworld, as you know, and traumatic experiences on this one, as perhaps you don't know." "I do know. Please be more direct." "Well, then, I was sorry for her. She was alone, and Jander, I thought, would make her feel less alone." "Sorry for her? Just that? Are you lovers? Have you been?" "No, not at all. I did not offer, nor did she." "Why?
Did she tell you we were lovers?
No, she did not. But I need independent confirmation in any case. I'll let you know when there is a contradiction. You needn't concern yourself about that. How is it that, with you sympathizing so with her, and from what I gather from Gladia, she feeling so grateful to you, that neither of you offered yourself? I gather that on Aurora, offering sex is about on a par with commenting upon the weather.
Falstaff frowned. You know nothing about it, Mr. Baley. Don't judge us by the standards of your own world. Sex is not a matter of great importance to us, but we are careful as to how we use it. It may not seem so to you, but none of us offer it lightly. Gladia, unused to our ways and sexually frustrated on Solaria, perhaps did offer it lightly, or desperately might be the better word, and it may not be surprising, therefore, that she did not enjoy the results.
Didn't you try to improve matters?
By offering myself? I am not what she needs, and for that matter, she is not what I need. I was sorry for her. I like her. I admire her artistic talent. And I want her to be happy. After all, Mr. Baley, surely you'll agree that the sympathy of one human being for another need not rest on sexual desire or on anything but decent human feeling. Have you never felt sympathy for anyone? Have you never wanted to help someone for no reason other than the good feeling it gave you to relieve another's misery? What kind of planet do you come from?
Baley said, What you say is justified, Dr. Falstaff. I do not question the fact that you are a decent human being. Still, bear with me. When I first asked you why you had given Jander to Gladia, you did not tell me then what you have told me just now. And with considerable emotion, too, I might add. Your first impulse was to duck, to hesitate, to play for time by asking why not. Granted that what you finally told me is so. What is it about the question that embarrassed you at first? What reason that you did not want to admit came to you before you settled on the reason you did want to admit? Forgive me for insisting, but I must know, and not out of personal curiosity, I assure you. If what you tell me is of no use in this sorry business, then you may consider it thrown into a black hole.
Falstaff said in a low voice, In all honesty, I am not sure why I parried your question. You surprised me into something that perhaps I don't want to face. Let me think, Mr. Baley.
They sat there together, quietly. The server cleared the table and left the room. Daniil and Giscard were elsewhere. Presumably they were guarding the house. Baley and Falstaff were at last alone in a robot-free room. Finally, Falstaff said,
I don't know what I ought to tell you, but let me go back some decades. I have 2 daughters. Perhaps you know that. They are by 2 different mothers.
Would you rather have had sons, Dr. Falstaff? Falstaff looked genuinely surprised.
No, not at all. The mother of my second daughter wanted a son, I believe, but I wouldn't give my consent to artificial insemination with selected sperm, not even with my own sperm, but insisted on the natural throw of the genetic dice. Before you ask why, it is because I prefer a certain operation of chance in life, and because I think on the whole I wanted a chance to have a daughter. I would have accepted a son, you understand, but I didn't want to abandon the chance of a daughter. I approve of daughters somehow. Well, my second proved a daughter, and that may have been one of the reasons that the mother dissolved the marriage soon after the birth. On the other hand, a sizable percentage of marriages are dissolved after a birth in any case, so perhaps I needn't look for special reasons.
She took the child with her, I take it. Falstaff bent a puzzled glance at Baley.
Why should she do that? But I forget, you're from Earth. No, of course not. The child would have been brought up in a nursery where she could be properly cared for, of course. Actually, though,
he wrinkled his nose as though in sudden embarrassment over a peculiar memory.
She wasn't put there. I decided to bring her up myself. It was legal to do so, but very unusual. I was quite young, of course, not yet having attained the century mark, but already I had made my mark in robotics.
Did you manage?
You mean to bring her up successfully? Oh, yes. I grew quite fond of her. I named her Vasilia. It was my mother's name, you see.
He chuckled reminiscently.
I get these odd streaks of sentiment, like my affection for my robots. I never met my mother, of course, but her name was on my charts, and she's still alive as far as I know, so I could see her. But I think there's something queasy about meeting someone in whose womb you once were. Where was I?
You named your daughter Vasilia.
Yes, and I did bring her up, and actually grew fond of her, very fond of her. I could see where the attraction lay in doing something like that, but of course I was an embarrassment to my friends, and I had to keep her out of their way when there was contact to be made, either social or professional. I remember once...
He paused. Yes?
It's something I haven't thought of for decades. She came running out, weeping for some reason, and threw herself into my arms when Dr. Sarton was with me discussing one of the very earliest design programs for humaniform robots. She was only 7 years old, I think, and of course I hugged her and kissed her and ignored the business at hand, which was quite unforgivable of me. Sarton left, coughing and choking, and most indignant. It was a full week before I could renew contact with him and resume deliberation. Children shouldn't have that effect on people, I suppose, but there are so few children, and they are so rarely encountered.
And your daughter, Vasilia, was fond of you?
Oh, yes, at least until... She was very fond of me. I saw to her schooling and made sure her mind was allowed to expand to the fullest.
You said she was fond of you until something. You did not finish the sentence. There came a time, then, when she was no longer fond of you. When was that?
She wanted to have her own establishment once she grew old enough. It was only natural.
And you did not want it?
What do you mean I did not want it? Of course I wanted it. You keep assuming I'm a monster, Mr. Baley.
Am I to assume, instead, that once she reached the age when she was to have her own establishment, she no longer felt the same affection for you that she naturally had when she was actively your daughter, living in your establishment as a dependent?
Not quite that simple. In fact, it was rather complicated. You see...
Festov seemed embarrassed.
I refused her when she offered herself to me.
She offered herself to you? Said Baley, horrified.
That part was only natural, said Festov indifferently. She knew me best. I had instructed her in sex, encouraged her experimentation, taken her to the games of Eros, done my best for her. It was something to be expected, and I was foolish for not expecting it and letting myself be caught.
But incest?
Festov said, Incest? Oh, yes, an earthly term. On Aurora, there's no such thing, Mr. Baley. Very few Aurorans know their immediate family. Naturally, if marriage is in question and children are applied for, there is a genealogical search, but what has that to do with social sex? No, the unnatural thing is that I refused my own daughter.
He reddened, his large ears most of all. I should hope so, muttered Baley.
I had no decent reasons for it either, at least none that I could explain to Vasilia. It is criminal of me not to foresee the matter and prepare a foundation for a rational rejection of one so young and inexperienced, if that were necessary, that would not wound her and subject her to a fearful humiliation. I am really unbearably ashamed that I took the unusual responsibility of bringing up a child, only to subject her to such an unpalatable experience. It seemed to me that we could continue our relationship as father and daughter, as friend and friend, but she did not give up. Whenever I rejected her, no matter how affectionately I tried to do so, matters grew worse between us.
Until finally?
Finally, she wanted her own establishment. I opposed it at first, not because I didn't want her to have one, but because I wanted to re-establish our loving relationship before she left. Nothing I did helped. It was perhaps the most trying time of my life. Eventually, she simply, and rather violently, insisted on leaving, and I could hold out no longer. She was a professional roboticist by then. I am grateful that she didn't abandon the profession out of distaste for me, and she was able to found an establishment without any help from me. She did so, in fact, and since then there has been little contact between us.
Baley said, It might be, Dr. Festov, that since she did not abandon robotics, she does not feel wholly estranged.
It is what she does best and is most interested in. It has nothing to do with me. I know that, for to begin with, I thought as you did, and I made friendly overtures, but they were not received.
Do you miss her, Dr. Festov?
Of course I miss her, Mr. Baley. That is an example of the mistake of bringing up a child. You give in to an irrational impulse, an atavistic desire, and it leads to inspiring the child with the strongest possible feeling of love, and then subject yourself to the possibility of having to refuse that same child's first offer of herself and scarring her emotionally for life. And to add to that, you subject yourself to this thoroughly irrational feeling of regret of absence. It's something I never felt before and have never felt since. She and I have both suffered needlessly, and the fault is entirely mine."
Fastoff fell into a kind of rumination, and Baley said gently, "And what has all this to do with Gladia?"
Fastoff started. "Oh, I had forgotten. Well, it's rather simple. Everything I've said about Gladia is true. I liked her, I sympathized with her, I admired her talent, but in addition, she resembles Vasilia. I noticed the similarity when I saw the first hyperwave account of her arrival from Solaria. It was quite startling, and it made me take an interest." He sighed. "When I realized that she, like Vasilia, had been sex-scarred, it was more than I could endure. I arranged to have her established near me, as you see. I have been her friend and done my best to cushion the difficulties of adapting to a strange world."
"She is a daughter substitute, then?"
"After a fashion, yes, I suppose you could call it that, Mr. Baley. And you have no idea how glad I am she never took it into her head to offer herself to me. To have rejected her would have been to relive my rejection of Vasilia. To have accepted her out of an inability to repeat the rejection would have embittered my life, for then I would have felt that I was doing for this stranger, this faint reflection of my daughter, what I would not do for my daughter herself. Either way, but never mind, you can see now why I hesitated to answer you at first. Somehow, thinking about it led my mind back to this tragedy in my life."
"And your other daughter?"
"Lumen,"
said Fastoff indifferently.
"I never had any contact with her, though I hear of her from time to time."
"She's running for political office, I understand."
"A local one, on the globalist ticket."
"What is that?"
"The globalists? They favor Aurora alone, just our own globe, you see. Aurorans are to take the lead in settling the galaxy. Others are to be barred as far as possible, particularly Earthmen. Enlightened self-interest, they call it."
"This is not your view, of course."
"Of course not. I am heading the Humanist Party, which believes that all human beings have a right to share in the galaxy. When I refer to my enemies, I mean the globalists."
"Lumen, then, is one of your enemies."
"Vasilia is one also. She is indeed a member of the Robotics Institute of Aurora, the RIA, that was founded a few years ago, and which is run by roboticists who view me as a demon to be defeated at all costs. As far as I know, however, my various ex-wives are apolitical, perhaps even humanist."
He smiled wryly and said,
"Well, Mr. Baley, have you asked all the questions you wanted to ask?"
Baley's hands aimlessly searched for pockets in his smooth, loose Auroran breeches, something he had been doing periodically since he had begun wearing them on the ship, and found none. He compromised, as he sometimes did, by folding his arms across his chest. He said, "Actually, Dr. Fastoff, I'm not at all sure you have yet answered the first question. It seems to me that you never tire of evading that. Why did you give Jander to Gladia? Let's get all of it into the open, so that we may be able to see light in what now seems darkness." 29. Fastoff reddened again. It might have been anger this time, but he continued to speak softly. He said, "Do not bully me, Mr. Baley. I have given you your answer. I was sorry for Gladia, and I thought Jander would be company for her. I have spoken more frankly to you than I would to anyone else, partly because of the position I am in, and partly because you are not an Auroran. In return, I demand a reasonable respect." Baley bit his lower lip. He was not on Earth. He had no official authority behind him, and he had more at stake than his professional pride. He said, "I apologize, Dr. Fastoff, if I have hurt your feelings. I do not mean to imply you are being untruthful or uncooperative. Nevertheless, I cannot operate without the whole truth. Let me suggest the possible answer I am looking for, and you can then tell me if I am correct, or nearly correct, or totally wrong. Can it be that you have given Jander to Gladia in order that he might serve as a focus for her sexual drive, and so that she might not have occasion to offer herself to you? Perhaps that was not your conscious reason, but think about it now. Is it possible that such a feeling contributed to the gift? Fastoff's hand picked up a light and transparent ornament that had been resting on the dining-room table. It turned it over and over and over. Except for that motion, Fastoff seemed frozen. Finally, he said,
"That might be so, Mr. Baley. Certainly after I loaned her Jander, it was never an outright gift, incidentally, I was less concerned about her offering herself to me."
"Do you know whether Gladia made use of Jander for sexual purposes?"
"Did you ask Gladia if she made use of him, Mr. Baley?"
"That has nothing to do with my question. Do you know? Did you witness any overt sexual actions between them? Did any of your robots inform you of such? Did she herself tell you?"
The answer to all those questions, Mr. Baley, is no. If I stop to think about it, there is nothing particularly unusual about the use of robots for sexual purposes by either men or women. Ordinary robots are not particularly adapted to it, but human beings are ingenious in this respect. As for Jander, he is adapted to it because he is as humaniform as we could make him.
So that he might take part in sex?
No, that was never in our minds. It was the abstract problem of building a totally humaniform robot that exercised the late Dr. Sarton and myself.
But such humaniform robots are ideally designed for sex, are they not?
I suppose they are, and now that I allow myself to think of it, and I admit I may have had it hidden in my mind from the start, Gladia might well have used Jander so. If she did, I hope the process gave her pleasure. I would consider my loan to her a good deed if it had.
Could it have been more of a good deed than you counted upon?
In what way?
What would you say if I told you that Gladia and Jander were wife and husband? Fastoff's hand, still holding the ornament, closed convulsively upon it, held it tightly for a moment, then let it drop.
What? That's ridiculous. It is legally impossible. There is no question of children, so there can't conceivably be an application for any. Without the intention of such an application, there can be no marriage.
This is not a matter of legality, Dr. Fastoff. Gladia is a Solarian, remember, and doesn't have the Auroran outlook. It is a matter of emotion. Gladia herself told me that she considered Jander to have been her husband. I think she considers herself now his widow, and that she has had another sexual trauma, and a very severe one. If in any way you knowingly contributed to this event—"
"By all the stars,"
said Fastoff with unwonted emotion,
"I didn't. Whatever else was in my mind, I never imagined that Gladia could fantasize marriage to a robot, however humaniform he might be. No Auroran could have imagined that."
Baley nodded and raised his hand. "I believe you. I don't think you are actor enough to be drowning me in a faked sincerity. But I had to know. It was, after all, just possible that—"
"No, it was not possible that I foresaw this situation, that I deliberately created this abominable widowhood for some reason. Never. It was not conceivable, so I did not conceive it. Mr. Baley, whatever I meant in placing Jander in her establishment, I meant well. I did not mean this. Meaning well is a poor defense, I know, but it is all that I have to offer."
"Dr. Fastoff, let us refer to that no more," said Baley. "What I have now to offer is a possible solution to the mystery." Fastoff breathed deeply and sat back in his chair.
"You hinted as much when you returned from Gladius."
He looked at Baley with a hint of savagery in his eyes.
"Could you not have told me this key you have at the start? Need we have gone through all this?"
"I'm sorry, Dr. Fastoff. The key makes no sense without all this."
"Well, then, get on with it."
"I will. Jander was in a position that you, the greatest robotics theoretician in all the world, did not foresee, by your own admission. He was pleasing Gladia so well that she was deeply in love with him and considered him her husband. What if it turns out that, in pleasing her, he was also displeasing her?"
"I'm not sure as to your meaning."
"Well, see here, Dr. Fastoff, she was rather secretive about the matter. I gather that on Aurora, sexual matters are not something one hides at all costs."
"We don't broadcast it over the hyperwave," said Fastoff dryly. But we don't make a greater secret of it than we do of any other strictly personal matter. We generally know who's been whose latest partner, and if one is dealing with friends, we often get an idea of how good or how enthusiastic or how much the reverse one or the other partner, or both, might be. It's a matter of small talk on occasion.
Yes, but you knew nothing of Gladia's connection with Jander.
I suspected...
Not the same thing. She told you nothing. You saw nothing. Nor could any robots report anything. She kept it secret even from you, her best friend on Aurora. Clearly, her robots were given careful instructions never to discuss Jander, and Jander himself must have been thoroughly instructed to give nothing away.
I suppose that's a fair conclusion.
Why should she do that, Dr. Fastolf?
A Solarian sense of privacy about sex?
Isn't that the same as saying she was ashamed of it?
She had no cause to be, although the matter of considering Jander a husband would have made her a laughingstock.
She might have concealed that portion very easily without concealing everything. Suppose, in her Solarian way, she was ashamed.
Well, then?
No one enjoys being ashamed. And she might have blamed Jander for it, in the rather unreasonable way people have of seeking to attribute to others the blame for unpleasantness that is clearly their own fault.
Yes?
There might have been times when Gladia, who has a short-fused temper, might have burst into tears, let us say, and upbraided Jander for being the source of her shame and her misery. It might not have lasted long, and she might have shifted quickly to apologies and caresses, but would not Jander have clearly gotten the idea that he was actually the source of her shame and her misery?
Perhaps.
And might this not have meant to Jander that if he continued the relationship, he would make her miserable, and that if he ended the relationship, he would make her miserable? Whatever he did, he would be breaking the first law, and, unable to act in any way without such a violation, he could only find refuge in not acting at all, and so went into mental freeze-out. Do you remember the story you told me earlier today of the legendary mind-reading robot who was driven into stasis by that robotics pioneer?
By Susan Calvin, yes. I see. You model your scenario on that old legend. Very ingenious, Mr. Baley. But it won't work.
Why not? When you said only you could bring about a mental freeze-out in Jander, you did not have the faintest idea that he was involved so deeply in so unexpected a situation. It runs exactly parallel to the Susan Calvin situation.
Let's suppose that the story about Susan Calvin and the mind-reading robot is not merely a totally fictitious legend. Let's take it seriously. There would still be no parallel between that story and the Jander situation. In the case of Susan Calvin, we would be dealing with an incredibly primitive robot, one that today would not even achieve the status of a toy. It could deal only qualitatively with such matters. A creates misery, not A creates misery, therefore mental freeze-out.
Baley said, and Jander?
Any modern robot, any robot of the last century, would weigh such matters quantitatively. Which of the two situations, A or not A, would create the most misery? The robot would come to a rapid decision and opt for minimum misery. The chance that he would judge the two mutually exclusive alternatives to produce precisely equal quantities of misery is small, and even if that should turn out to be the case, the modern robot is supplied with a randomization factor. If A and not A are precisely equal misery producers according to his judgment, he chooses one or the other in a completely unpredictable way, and then follows that unquestioningly. He does not go into mental freeze-out.
Are you saying it is impossible for Jander to go into mental freeze-out? You have been saying you could have produced it.
In the case of the humaniform positronic brain, there is a way of sidetracking the randomization factor that depends entirely on the way in which that brain is constructed. Even if you know the basic theory, it is a very difficult and long-sustained process to so lead the robot down the garden path, so to speak, by a skillful succession of questions and orders as to finally induce the mental freeze-out. It is unthinkable that it can be done by accident, and the mere existence of an apparent contradiction as that produced by simultaneous love and shame could not do the trick without the most careful quantitative adjustment under the most unusual conditions. Which leaves us, as I keep saying, with indeterministic chance as the only possible way in which it happened.
But your enemies will insist that your own guilt is the more likely. Could we not, in our turn, insist that Jander was brought to mental freeze-out by the conflict brought on by Gladia's love and shame? Would this not sound plausible? And would it not win public opinion to your side?
Falstaff frowned. Mr. Baley, you are too eager. Think about it seriously. If we were to try to get out of our dilemma in this rather dishonest fashion, what would be the consequence? I say nothing of the shame and misery it would bring to Gladia, who would suffer not only the loss of Jander, but the feeling that she herself had brought about that loss, if in fact she had really felt and had somehow revealed her shame. I would not want to do that. But let us put that to one side, if we can. Consider instead that my enemies would say that I had loaned her, Jander, precisely to bring about what had happened. I would have done it, they would say, in order to develop a method for mental freeze-out in humaniform robots while escaping all apparent responsibility myself. We would be worse off than we are now, for I would not only be accused of being an underhanded intriguer, as I am now, but in addition of having behaved monstrously toward an unsuspecting woman whom I had pretended to befriend, something I have so far been spared.
Baley was staggered. He felt his jaw drop and his voice degenerate to a stutter. Surely they would not...
But they would. You yourself were at least half inclined to think so not very many minutes ago.
Merely as a remote...
My enemies would not find it remote, and they would not publicize it as remote.
Baley knew he had reddened. He felt the wave of heat and found he could not look Falstaff in the face. He cleared his throat and said, "You are right. I jumped for a way out without thinking, and I can only ask your pardon. I am deeply ashamed. There's no way out, I suppose, but the truth, if we can find it."
Falstaff said, "Don't despair. You have already uncovered events in connection with Jander that I never dreamed of. You may uncover more, and eventually what seems altogether a mystery to us now may unfold and become plain. What do you plan to do next?"
But Baley could think of nothing through the shame of his fiasco. He said, "I don't really know."
"Well, then, it was unfair of me to ask. You have had a long day, and not an easy one. It is not surprising that your brain is a bit sluggish now. Why not rest, view a film, go to sleep? You will be better off in the morning."
Baley nodded and mumbled, "Perhaps you're right." But at the moment, he didn't think he'd be any better off in the morning at all. 30. The bedroom was cold, both in temperature and ambience. Baley shivered slightly. So low a temperature within a room gave it the unpleasant feeling of being outside. The walls were faintly off-white and, unusual for Falstaff's establishment, were not decorated. The floor seemed, to the sight, to be of smooth ivory, but to the bare feet it felt carpeted. The bed was white, and the smooth blanket was cold to the touch. He sat down at the edge of the mattress and found it yielded very slightly to the pressure of his weight. He said to Daniil, who had entered with him, "Daniil, does it disturb you when a human being tells a lie?" "I am aware that human beings lie on occasion, partner Elijah. Sometimes a lie might be useful or even mandatory. My feeling about a lie depends upon the liar, the occasion, and the reason." "Can you always tell when a human being lies?" "No, partner Elijah." "Does it seem to you that Dr. Falstaff often lies?" "It has never seemed to me that Dr. Falstaff has told a lie." "Even in connection with Jander's death?" "As far as I can tell, he tells the truth in every respect." "Perhaps he has instructed you to say that, were I to ask?" "He has not, partner Elijah." "But perhaps he instructed you to say that, too." He paused. Again, of what use was it to cross-examine a robot? And in this particular case he was inviting infinite regression. He was suddenly aware that the mattress had been yielding slowly under him until it now half enfolded his hips. He rose suddenly and said, "Is there any way of warming the room, Daniil?"
"It will feel warmer when you are under the cover with the light out, partner Elijah."
Ah. He looked about suspiciously. "Would you put the light out, Daniil, and remain in the room when you have done so?" The light went out almost at once, and Baley realized that his supposition that this room at least was undecorated was totally wrong. As soon as it was dark, he felt he was outside. There was the soft sound of wind in trees, and the small, sleepy mutters of distant life forms. There was also the illusion of stars overhead, with an occasional drifting cloud that was just barely visible. "Put the light back on, Daniil." The room flooded with light. "Daniil," said Baley, "I don't want any of that. I want no stars, no clouds, no sounds, no trees, no wind, no sense either. I want darkness, featureless darkness. Could you arrange that?"
"Certainly, partner Elijah."
"Then do so, and show me how I may myself put out the light when I am ready to sleep."
"I am here to protect you, partner Elijah."
Baley said grumpily, "You can do that, I am sure, from just the other side of the door. Giscard, I imagine, will be just outside the windows, if indeed there are windows beyond the draperies."
"There are. If you cross that threshold, partner Elijah, you will find a personal reserved for yourself. That section of the wall is not material, and you will move easily through it. The light will turn on as you enter, and it will go out as you leave, and there are no decorations. You will be able to shower if you wish, or do anything else that you care to before retiring or after waking."
Baley turned in the indicated direction. He saw no break in the wall, but the floor molding in that spot did show a thickening, as though it were a threshold. "How do I see it in the dark, Daniil?" he asked.
"That section of the wall, which is not a wall, will glow faintly. As for the room light, there is this depression in the headboard of your bed, which, if you place your finger within it, will darken the room if light, or lighten it if dark."
"Thank you. You may leave now."
Half an hour later he was through with the personal and found himself huddling beneath the blanket with the light out, enveloped by a warm, spirit-hugging darkness. As Fastoff had said, it had been a long day. It was almost unbelievable that it had been only that morning that he had arrived on Aurora. He had learned a great deal, and yet none of it had done him any good. He lay in the dark and went over the events of the day in quiet succession, hoping that something might occur to him that had eluded him before. But nothing like that happened. So much for the quietly thoughtful, keen-eyed, subtle-brained Elijah Baley of the hyperwave drama. The mattress was again half enfolding him, and it was like a warm enclosure. He moved slightly, and it straightened beneath him, then slowly molded itself to fit his new position. There was no point in trying, with his worn, sleep-seeking mind, to go over the day again, but he could not help trying a second time, following his own footsteps on this, his first day on Aurora, from the spaceport to Fastoff's establishment, then to Gladia's, then back to Fastoff. Gladia, more beautiful than he remembered, but hard, something hard about her. Or has she just grown a protective shell, poor woman? He thought warmly of her reaction to the touch of her hand against his cheek. If he could have remained with her, he could have taught her. Stupid Aurorans. Disgustingly casual attitude towards sex. Anything goes. Which means nothing really goes. Not worthwhile. Stupid. To Fastoff, to Gladia, back to Fastoff, back to Fastoff. He moved a little, and then abstractedly felt the mattress remold again. Back to Fastoff. What happened on the way back to Fastoff? Something said, something not said. And on the ship before he ever got to Aurora, something that fit in. Baley was in the never-never world of half-sleep, when the mind is liberated and follows a law of its own. It is like the body, flying, soaring through the air, and liberated of gravity. Of its own accord, it was taking the events, little aspects he had not noted, putting them together, one thing adding to another, clicking into place, forming a web, a fabric. And then, it seemed to him, he heard a sound, and he roused himself to a level of wakefulness. He listened, heard nothing, and sank once more into the half-sleep to take up the line of thought, and it eluded him. It was like a work of art sinking into a morass. He could still see its outlines, the masses of color. They got dimmer, but he still knew it was there.
and even as he scrambled desperately for it, it was gone altogether, and he remembered nothing of it, nothing at all. Had he actually thought of anything? Or was the memory of having done so itself an illusion born of some drifting nonsense in a mind asleep? And he was indeed asleep. When he woke briefly during the night, he thought to himself, I had an idea, an important idea. But he remembered nothing except that something had been there. He remained awake a while, staring into the darkness. If, in fact, something had been there, it would come back in time. Or it might not. Jehoshaphat. And he slept again. Chapter 8. Fastov and Vasilia. 31. Baley woke with a start and drew in his breath with sharp suspicion. There was a faint and unrecognizable odor in the air that vanished by his second breath. Daniil stood gravely at the side of the bed. He said, I trust, partner Elijah, that you have slept well. Baley looked around. The drapes were still closed, but it was clearly daylight outside. Giscard was laying out clothing, totally different, from shoes to jacket, from anything he had worn the day before. He said, Quite well, Daniil. Did something awaken me? There was an injection of anti-somnin in the room's air circulation, partner Elijah. It activates the arousal system. We used a smaller than normal amount, since we were uncertain of your reaction. Perhaps we should have used a smaller amount still. Baley said, It did seem to be rather like a paddle over the rear. What time is it? Daniil said, It is 07:05 by Auroran measure. Physiologically, breakfast will be ready in half an hour. He said it without a trace of humor, though a human being might have found a smile appropriate. Giscard said, his voice stiffer and a trifle less intoned than Daniil's, Sir, friend Daniil and I may not enter the personal. If you will do so and let us know if there is anything you will need, we will supply it at once. Yes, of course. Baley raised himself, swung around, and got out of bed. Giscard began stripping the bed at once. May I have your pajamas, sir? Baley hesitated for a moment only. It was a robot who asked, nothing more. He disrobed and handed the garment to Giscard, who took it with a small, grave nod of acceptance. Baley looked at himself with distaste. He was suddenly conscious of a middle-aged body that was very likely in less good condition than Fastov's, which was nearly 3 times as old. Automatically he looked for his slippers and found there were none. Presumably he needed none. The floor seemed warm and soft to his feet. He stepped into the personal and called out for instructions. From the other side of the illusory section of the wall, Giscard solemnly explained the working of the shaver, of the toothpaste dispenser, explained how to put the flushing device on automatic, how to control the temperature of the shower. Everything was on a grander and more elaborate scale than anything Earth had to offer, and there were no partitions on the other side of which he could hear the movements and involuntary sounds of someone else, something he had to ignore rigidly to maintain the illusion of privacy. It was effete, thought Baley somberly as he went through the luxurious ritual, but it was an effeteness that he already knew he could become accustomed to. If he stayed here on Aurora any length of time, he would find the culture shock of returning to Earth painfully intense, particularly with respect to the personal. He hoped that the readjustment would not take long, but he also hoped that any Earth people who settled new worlds would not feel impelled to cling to the concept of community personals. Perhaps, thought Baley, that was how one ought to define effete, that to which one can become easily accustomed. Baley stepped out of the personal, various functions completed, chin new-cropped, teeth glistening, body showered and dry. He said, Giscard, where do I find the deodorant? Giscard said, I do not understand, sir. Daniil said quickly, When you activated the lathering control, partner Elijah, that introduced a deodorant effect. I ask pardon for friend Giscard's failure to understand. He lacks my experience on Earth. Baley lifted his eyebrows dubiously and began to dress with Giscard's help. He said, I see that you and Giscard are still with me every step of the way. Has there been any sign of any attempt at putting me out of the way? Daniil said, None thus far, partner Elijah. Nevertheless, it would be wise to have friend Giscard and myself with you at all times, if that can possibly be managed. Why is that, Daniil? For 2 reasons, partner Elijah. First, we can help you with any aspect of Auroran culture or folkways with which you are unfamiliar. Second, friend Giscard in particular can record and reproduce every word of every conversation you may have. This may be of value to you. You will recall that there were times in your conversations with both Dr. Fastov and with Miss Gladia
when friend Giscard and I were at a distance or in another room."
"So that conversations were not recorded by Giscard?"
"Actually, they were, Partner Elijah, but with low fidelity, and there may be portions that will not be as clear as we would want them to be. It would be better if we stayed as close to you as is convenient."
Baley said, "Daniil, are you of the opinion that I will be more at ease if I think of you as guides and as recording devices rather than as guards? Why not simply come to the conclusion that as guards you two are completely unnecessary? Since there have been no attempts at me so far, why isn't it possible to conclude that there will be no attempts at me in the future?"
"No, Partner Elijah. That would be incautious. Dr. Fastoff feels that you are viewed with great apprehension by his enemies. They have made attempts to persuade the chairman not to give Dr. Fastoff permission to call you in, and they will surely continue to attempt to persuade him to have you ordered back to Earth at the earliest possible moment."
"That sort of peaceful opposition requires no guards."
"No, sir, but if the opposition has reason to fear that you may exculpate Dr. Fastoff, it is possible that they may feel driven to extremes. You are, after all, not an Auroran, and the inhibitions against violence on our world would therefore be weakened in your case."
Baley said dourly, "The fact that I've been here a whole day and that nothing has happened should relieve their minds greatly and reduce the threat of violence considerably."
"It would seem so," said Daniil, showing no signs that he recognized the irony in Baley's voice.
"On the other hand," said Baley, "if I seem to make progress, then the danger to me immediately increases."
Daniil paused to consider, then said, "That would seem to be a logical consequence."
"And therefore you and Giscard will come with me wherever I go, just in case I manage to do my job a little too well."
Daniil paused again, then said, "Your way of putting it, Partner Elijah, puzzles me, but you seem to be correct."
"In that case," said Baley, "I'm ready for breakfast, though it does take the edge off my appetite to be told that the alternative to failure is attempted assassination."
32.
Fastoff smiled at Baley across the breakfast table.
"Did you sleep well, Mr. Baley?"
Baley studied the slice of ham with fascination. It had to be cut with a knife. It was grainy. It had a discreet strip of fat running down one side. It had, in short, not been processed. The result was that it tasted hammier, so to speak. There were also fried eggs, with the yolk a flattened semisphere in the center, rimmed by white, rather like some daisies that Ben had pointed out to him in the field back on Earth. Intellectually, he knew what an egg looked like before it was processed, and he knew that it contained both a yolk and a white, but he had never seen them still separate when ready to eat. Even on the ship coming here, and even on Solaria, eggs, when served, were scrambled. He looked up sharply at Fastoff. "Pardon me?"
Fastoff said patiently, "Did you sleep well?"
"Yes, quite well. I would probably still be sleeping if it hadn't been for the antisomnon."
"Ah, yes. Not quite the hospitality a guest has the right to expect, but I felt you might want an early start."
"You are entirely right, and I'm not exactly a guest either."
Fastoff ate in silence for a moment or two. He sipped at his hot drink, then said, "Has any enlightenment come overnight? Have you awakened, perhaps, with a new perspective, a new thought?"
Baley looked at Fastoff suspiciously, but the other's face reflected no sarcasm. As Baley lifted his drink to his lips, he said, "I'm afraid not. I am as ineffectual now as I was last night." He sipped and involuntarily made a face. Fastoff said, "I'm sorry you find the drink unpalatable." Baley grunted and cautiously tasted it again. Fastoff said, "It is simply coffee, you know, decaffeinated." Baley frowned. "It doesn't taste like coffee, and... Pardon me, Dr. Fastoff. I don't want to begin to sound paranoid, but Daniil and I have just had a half-joking exchange on the possibility of violence against me. Half-joking on my part, of course, not on Daniil's. And it is in my mind that one way they might get at me is..." His voice trailed away. Fastoff's eyebrows moved upward. He reached for Baley's coffee with a murmur of apology and smelled it. He then ladled out a small portion by spoon and tasted it. He said, "Perfectly normal, Mr. Baley. This is not an attempt at poisoning." Baley said, "I'm sorry to behave so foolishly, since I know this has been prepared by your own robots. But are you certain?" Fastoff smiled.
Robots have been tampered with before now. However, there has been no tampering this time. It is just that coffee, although universally popular on the various worlds, comes in different strains. It is notorious that each human being prefers the coffee of his own world. I'm sorry, Mr. Baley. I have no Earth strain to give you. Would you prefer milk? That is relatively constant from world to world. Fruit juice? Aurora's grape juice is considered superior throughout the worlds generally. There are some who hint darkly that we allow it to ferment somewhat, but that, of course, is not true. Water?
I'll try your grape juice. Baley looked at the coffee dubiously. I suppose I ought to try to get used to this.
Not at all, said Fastoff. Why seek out the unpleasant if that is unnecessary? And so,
his smile seemed a bit strained as he returned to his earlier remark,
night and sleep have brought no useful reflection to you?
I'm sorry, said Baley. Then, frowning at a dim memory, although...
Yes?
I have the impression that just before falling asleep, in the free association limbo between sleep and waking, it seemed to me that I had something.
Indeed? What?
I don't know. The thought drove me into wakefulness, but didn't follow me there. Or else some imagined sound distracted me. I don't remember. I snatched at the thought, but didn't retrieve it. It's gone. I think that this sort of thing is not uncommon.
Fastoff looked thoughtful. Are you sure of this?
Not really. The thought grew so tenuous so rapidly I couldn't even be sure that I had actually had it. And even if I had, it may have seemed to make sense to me, only because I was half asleep. If it were repeated to me now in broad daylight, it might make no sense at all.
But whatever it was, and however fugitive, it would have left a trace, surely?
I imagine so, Dr. Fastoff, in which case it will come to me again. I'm confident of that.
Ought we to wait?
What else can we do?
There's such a thing as a psychic probe.
Baley sat back in his chair and stared at Fastoff for a moment. He said, I've heard of it, but it isn't used in police work on Earth.
We're not on Earth, Mr. Baley, said Fastoff softly.
It can do brain damage. Am I not right?
Not likely in the proper hands.
Not impossible, even in the proper hands, said Baley. It's my understanding that it cannot be used on Aurora except under sharply defined conditions. Those it is used on must be guilty of a major crime, or must...
Yes, Mr. Baley, but that refers to Aurorans. You are not an Auroran.
You mean because I'm an Earthman, I'm to be treated as inhuman?
Fastoff smiled and spread his hands. Come, Mr. Baley, it was just a thought. Last night you were desperate enough to suggest trying to solve our dilemma by placing Gladia in a horrible and tragic position. I was wondering if you were desperate enough to risk yourself.
Baley rubbed his eyes and for a minute or so remained silent. Then, in an altered voice, he said, I was wrong last night. I admitted it. As for this matter now, there is no assurance that what I thought of when half asleep had any relevance to the problem. It may have been pure fantasy, illogical nonsense. There may have been no thought at all, nothing. Would you consider it wise, for so small a likelihood of gain, to risk damage to my brain when it is upon that for which you say you depend for a solution to the problem?
Fastoff nodded. You plead your case eloquently, and I was not really serious.
Thank you, Dr. Fastoff.
But where are we to go from here?
For one thing, I wish to speak to Gladia again. There are points concerning which I need clarification.
You should have taken them up last night.
So I should, but I had more than I could properly absorb last night, and there were points that escaped me. I am an investigator and not an infallible computer.
Fastoff said, I was not imputing blame. It's just that I hate to see Gladia unnecessarily disturbed. In view of what you told me last night, I can only assume she must be in a state of deep distress.
Undoubtedly. But she is also desperately anxious to find out what happened. Who, if anyone, killed the one she viewed as her husband? That's understandable, too. I'm sure she'll be willing to help me. And I wish to speak to another person as well.
To whom?
To your daughter, Vasilia.
To Vasilia? Why? What purpose will that serve?
She is a roboticist. I would like to talk to a roboticist other than yourself.
I do not wish that, Mr. Baley.
They had finished eating. Baley stood up. Dr. Fastoff, once again I must remind you that I am here at your request. I have no formal authority to do police work. I have no connection with any Auroran authorities. The only chance I have of getting to the bottom of this miserable mess is to hope that various people will voluntarily cooperate with me and answer my questions. If you stop me from attempting this, then it is clear that I can get no farther than I am right now, which is nowhere. It will also look extremely bad for you, and therefore for Earth, so I urge you not to stand in my way. If you make it possible for me to interview anyone I wish, or even simply try to make it possible by interceding on my behalf, then the people of Aurora will surely consider that to be a sign of self-conscious innocence on your part. If you hamper my investigation, on the other hand, to what conclusion can they come but that you are guilty and fear exposure?" Fastoff said, with poorly suppressed annoyance,
"I understand that, Mr. Baley. But why Vasilia? There are other roboticists."
"Vasilia is your daughter. She knows you. She might have strong opinions concerning the likelihood of your destroying a robot. Since she is a member of the Robotics Institute and on the side of your political enemies, any favorable evidence she may give would be persuasive."
"And if she testifies against me?"
"We'll face that when it comes. Would you get in touch with her and ask her to receive me?"
Fastoff said resignedly, "I will oblige you, but you are mistaken if you think I can easily persuade her to see you. She may be too busy, or think she is. She may be away from Aurora. She may simply not wish to be involved. I tried to explain last night that she thinks she has reason, to be hostile to me. My asking her to see you may indeed impel her to refuse, merely as a sign of her displeasure with me."
"Would you try, Dr. Fastoff?"
Fastoff sighed. "I will try while you're at Gladia's. I presume you wish to see her directly? I might point out that a trimensional viewing would do. The image is high enough in quality so that you will not be able to tell it from personal presence."
"I'm aware of that, Dr. Fastoff, but Gladia is a Solarian and has unpleasant associations with trimensional viewing, and in any case I am of the opinion that there is an intangible additional effectiveness in being within touching distance. The present situation is too delicate, and the difficulty is too great for me to want to give up that additional effectiveness."
"Well, I'll alert Gladia."
He turned away, hesitated, and turned back.
"But, Mr. Baley—"
"Yes, Dr. Fastoff?"
"Last night you told me that the situation was serious enough for you to disregard any convenience it might cause Gladia. There were, you pointed out, greater things at stake."
"That's so, but you can rely on me not to disturb her if I can help it."
"I am not talking about Gladia now. I merely warn you that this essentially proper view of yours should be extended to myself. I don't expect you to worry about my convenience or pride if you should get a chance to talk to Vasilia. I don't look forward to the results, but if you do talk to her, I will have to endure any ensuing embarrassment, and you must not seek to spare me. Do you understand?"
"To be perfectly honest, Dr. Fastoff, it was never my intention to spare you. If I have to weigh your embarrassment or shame against the welfare of your policies and against the welfare of my world, I would not hesitate a moment to shame you."
"Good. And, Mr. Baley, we must extend that attitude also to yourself. Your convenience must not be allowed to stand in the way."
"It wasn't allowed to do so when you decided to have me brought here without consulting me."
"I'm referring to something else. If, after a reasonable time, not a long time, but a reasonable time, you make no progress toward a solution, we will have to consider the possibilities of psychic probing after all. Our last chance might be to find out what it is your mind knows that you do not know it knows."
"It may know nothing, Dr. Fastoff."
Fastoff looked at Baley sadly. "Agreed. But as you said concerning the possibility of Vasilia testifying against me, we'll face that when it comes." He turned away again and walked out of the room.
Baley looked after him thoughtfully. It seemed to him now that if he made progress, he would face physical reprisals of an unknown but possibly dangerous kind, and if he did not make progress, he would face the psychic probe, which could scarcely be better. Jehoshaphat, he muttered softly to himself. 33. The walk to Gladia's seemed shorter than it had on the day before. The day was sunlit and pleasant again, but the vista looked not at all the same. The sunlight slanted from the opposite direction, of course, and the coloring seemed slightly different. It could be that the plant life looked a bit different in the morning than in the evening, or smelled different. Baley had on occasion thought that of Earth's plant life as well, he remembered. Daniil and Giscard accompanied him again, but they traveled more closely to him and seemed less intensely alert. Baley said idly, Does the sun shine here all the time?
It does not, partner Elijah, said Daniil. Were it to do so, that would be disastrous for the plant world and therefore for humanity. The prediction is in fact for the sky to cloud over in the course of the day.
What was that? Asked Baley, startled. A small and gray-brown animal was crouched in the grass. Seeing them, it hopped away in leisurely fashion.
A rabbit, sir, said Giscard.
Baley relaxed. He had seen them in the fields of Earth, too. Gladia was not waiting for them at the door this time, but she was clearly expecting them. When a robot ushered them in, she did not stand up, but said, with something between crossness and weariness, "Dr. Fastoff told me you had to see me again. What now?" She was wearing a robe that clung tightly to her body and was clearly wearing nothing underneath. Her hair was pulled back shapelessly, and her face was pallid. She looked more drawn than she had the day before, and it was clear that she had had little sleep. Daniil, remembering what had happened the day before, did not enter the room. Giscard entered, however, glanced keenly about, then retired to a wall niche. One of Gladia's robots stood in another niche. Baley said, "I'm terribly sorry, Gladia, to have to bother you again." Gladia said, "I forgot to tell you last night that after Jander is torched, he will of course be recycled for use in the robot factories again. It will be amusing, I suppose, to know that each time I see a newly formed robot, I can take time to realize that many of Jander's atoms form part of him." Baley said, "We ourselves, when we die, are recycled, and who knows what atoms of whom are in you and me right now, or in whom ours will someday be."
"You are very right, Elijah, and you remind me how easy it is to philosophize over the sorrows of others."
"That is right, too, Gladia, but I did not come to philosophize."
"Do what you came to do, then."
"I must ask questions."
"Weren't yesterday's enough? Have you spent the time since then in thinking up new ones?"
"In part, yes, Gladia. Yesterday you said that even after you were with Jander, as wife and husband, there were men who offered themselves to you and that you refused. It is that which I must question you about."
"Why?"
Baley ignored the question. "Tell me," he said, "how many men offered themselves to you during the time you were married to Jander?"
"I don't keep records, Elijah. 3 or 4.
"Were any of them persistent? Did anyone offer himself more than once?"
Gladia, who had been avoiding his eyes, now looked at him full and said, "Have you talked to others about this?"
Baley shook his head. "I have talked on this subject to no one but you. From your question, however, I suspect that there was at least one who was persistent."
"One. Santarix Gramianus."
She sighed.
"Aurorans have such peculiar names, and he was peculiar for an Auroran. I had never met one as repetitious in the matter as he. He was always polite, always accepted my refusal with a small smile and a stately bow, and then, as like as not, he would try again the next week or even the next day. The mere repetition was a small discourtesy. A decent Auroran would accept a refusal permanently, unless the prospective partner made it reasonably plain there was a change of mind." "Tell me again, did those who offered themselves to you know of your relationship with Jander?" "It was not something I mentioned in casual conversation."
"Well, then, consider this Gramianus specifically. Did he know that Jander was your husband?"
"I never told him so."
"Don't dismiss it like that, Gladia. It's not a matter of his being told. Unlike the others, he offered himself repeatedly. How often would you say, by the way? 3 times? 4? How many?"
"I did not count," said Gladia wearily. "It might have been a dozen times or more. If he weren't a likable person otherwise, I would have had my robots bar the establishment to him."
"Ah, but you didn't. And it takes time to make multiple offerings. He came to see you. He encountered you. He had time to note Jander's presence and how you behaved to him. Might he not have guessed at the relationship?"
Gladia shook her head. "I don't think so. Jander never intruded when I was with any human being."
"Were those your instructions? I presume they must have been."
"They were, and before you suggest I was ashamed of the relationship, it was merely an attempt to avoid bothersome complications. I have retained some instinct of privacy about sex that Aurorans don't have."
"Think again. Might he have guessed? Here he is, a man in love."
"In love?" The sound she made was almost a snort. "What do Aurorans know of love?"
A man who considers himself in love. You are not responsive. Might he not, with the sensitivity and suspicion of a disappointed lover, have guessed? Consider, did he ever make any roundabout reference to Jander? Anything to cause you the slightest suspicion? No, no. It would be unheard of for any Auroran to comment adversely on the sexual preferences or habits of another. Not necessarily adversely. A humorous comment, perhaps. Any indication that he suspected the relationship? No. If young Gramianus had ever breathed a word of that sort, he would never have seen the inside of my establishment again, and I would have seen to it that he never approached me again. But he wouldn't have done anything of the sort. He was the soul of eager politeness to me. You say young. How old is this Gramianus? About my age. 35, perhaps even a year or two younger. A child, said Baley sadly. Even younger than I am. But at that age... Suppose he guessed at your relationship with Jander and said nothing at all. Might he not nevertheless have been jealous? Jealous? It occurred to Baley that the word might have little meaning on Aurora or Solaria. Angered that you should prefer another to himself. Gladius said sharply, I know the meaning of the word jealous. I repeated it only out of surprise that you should think any Auroran was jealous. On Aurora, people are not jealous over sex. Over other things, certainly, but not over sex. There was a definite sneer upon her face. Even if he were jealous, what would it matter? What could he do? Wasn't it possible he might have told Jander that the relationship with a robot would endanger your position on Aurora? That would not have been true. Jander might have believed it, if he were told so. Believed he was endangering you, harming you. Might not that have been the reason for the mental freeze-out? Jander would never have believed that. He made me happy every day he was my husband, and I told him so. Baley remained calm. She was missing the point, but he would simply have to make it clearer. I am sure he believed you, but he might also feel impelled to believe someone else who told him the reverse, if he were then caught in an unbearable first-law dilemma. Gladia's face contorted, and she shrieked, That's mad! You're just telling me the old fairy tale of Susan Calvin and the mind-reading robot. No one over the age of 10 can possibly believe that. Isn't it possible that... No, it isn't. I am from Solaria, and I know enough about robots to know it isn't possible. It would take an incredible expert to tie first-law knots in a robot. Dr. Fastoff might be able to do it, but certainly not Santarix Gramianus. Gramianus is a stylist. He works on human beings. He cuts hair, designs clothing. I do the same, but at least I work on robots. Gramianus has never touched a robot. He knows nothing about them, except to order one to close the window or something like that. Are you trying to tell me that it was the relationship between Jander and me? Me? She tapped herself harshly on the breastbone with one rigid finger, the swells of her small breasts scarcely showing under her robe, that caused Jander's death? It was nothing you did knowingly, said Baley, wanting to stop but unable to quit probing. What if Gramianus had learned from Dr. Fastoff how to... Gramianus didn't know Dr. Fastoff and couldn't have understood anything Dr. Fastoff might have told him anyhow. You can't know for certain what Gramianus might or might not understand. And as for not knowing Dr. Fastoff, Gramianus must have been frequently in your establishment if he hounded you so, and Dr. Fastoff was almost never in my establishment. Last night, when he came with you, it was only the second time he had crossed my threshold. He was afraid that to be too close to me would drive me away. He admitted that once. He lost his daughter that way. He thought something foolish like that. You see, Elijah, when you live several centuries, you have plenty of time to lose thousands of things. Be thankful for short life, Elijah. She was weeping uncontrollably. Baley looked and felt helpless. I'm sorry, Gladia. I have no more questions. Shall I call a robot? Will you need help? She shook her head and waved her hand at him. Just go away, she said in a strangled voice. Go away. Baley hesitated, and then strode out of the room, taking one last uncertain look at her as he walked out the door. Giscard followed in his footsteps, and Daniil joined him as he left the house. He scarcely noticed. It occurred to him abstractedly that he was coming to accept their presence as he would have that of his shadow or of his clothing, that he was reaching a point where he would feel bare without them. He walked rapidly back toward the Fastoff establishment, his mind churning. His desire to see Vasilia had at first been a matter of desperation, a lack of any other object of curiosity. But now things had changed. There was just a chance that he had stumbled on something vital. 34. Fastoff's homely face was set in grim lines when Baley returned.
"Any progress?"
he asked. "I eliminated part of a possibility, perhaps."
"Part of a possibility? How do you eliminate the other part? Better yet, how do you establish a possibility?"
Baley said, "By finding it impossible to eliminate a possibility, a beginning is made at establishing one."
"And if you find it impossible to eliminate the other part of the possibility you mysteriously mentioned?"
Baley shrugged. "Before we waste our time considering that, I must see your daughter." Fastoff looked dejected.
"Well, Mr. Baley, I did as you asked me to do and tried to contact her. It was necessary to awaken her."
"You mean she is in part of the planet where it is night? I hadn't thought of that." Baley felt chagrined. "I'm afraid I'm fool enough to imagine I'm on Earth still. In underground cities, day and night lose their meaning, and time tends to be uniform."
"It's not that bad. EOS is the robotics center of Aurora, and you'll find few roboticists who live out of it. She was simply sleeping, and being awakened did not improve her temper, apparently. She would not speak to me."
"Call again," said Baley urgently.
"I spoke to her secretarial robot, and there was an uncomfortable relaying of messages. She made it quite plain she will not speak to me in any fashion. She was a little more flexible with you. The robot announced that she would give you 5 minutes on her private viewing channel if you call—" Fastoff consulted the time strip on the wall. "In half an hour. She will not see you in person under any conditions."
"The conditions are insufficient, and so is the time. I must see her in person for as long as is needed." "Did you explain the importance of this, Dr. Fastoff?"
"I tried. She is not concerned."
"You are her father, surely."
"She is less inclined to bend her decision for my sake than for a randomly chosen stranger. I knew this, so I made use of Giscard."
"Giscard?"
"Oh, yes. Giscard is a great favorite of hers. When she was studying robotics at the university, she took the liberty of adjusting some minor aspects of his programming, and nothing makes for a closer relationship with a robot than that, except for Gladys's method, of course. It was almost as though Giscard were Andrew Martin."
"Who is Andrew Martin?"
"Was, not is," said Fastoff. "You have never heard of him?"
"Never."
"How odd. These ancient legends of ours all have Earth as their setting, yet on Earth they are not known. Andrew Martin was a robot who gradually, step by step, was supposed to have become humaniform. To be sure, there have been humaniform robots before Daniil, but they were all simple toys, little more than automatons. Nevertheless, amazing stories are told of the abilities of Andrew Martin, a sure sign of the legendary nature of the tale. There was a woman who was part of the legends who was usually known as Little Miss. The relationship is too complicated to describe now, but I suppose that every little girl on Aurora has daydreamed of being Little Miss and of having Andrew Martin as a robot. Vasilia did, and Giscard was her Andrew Martin."
"Well, then?"
"I asked her robot to tell her that you would be accompanied by Giscard. She hasn't seen him in years, and I thought that might lure her into agreeing to see you."
"But it didn't, I presume?"
"It didn't."
"Then we must think of something else. There must be some way of inducing her to see me." Fastoff said,
"Perhaps you will think of one. In a few minutes you will view her on Trimensic, and you will have 5 minutes to convince her that she ought to see you personally."
5 minutes? What can I do in 5 minutes?
"I don't know. It is better, after all, than nothing."
35. 15 minutes later, Baley stood before the trimensional viewing screen, ready to meet Vasilia Fastoff. Dr. Fastoff had left, saying with a wry smile that his presence would certainly make his daughter less amenable to persuasion. Nor was Daniil present. Only Giscard remained behind to keep Baley company. Giscard said, "Dr. Vasilia's Trimensic channel is open for reception. Are you ready, sir?" "As ready as I can be," said Baley grimly. He had refused to sit, feeling he might be more imposing if he were standing. How imposing could an Earthman be? The screen grew bright as the rest of the room dimmed, and a woman appeared, in rather uncertain focus at first. She was standing facing him, her right hand resting on a laboratory bench laden with sets of diagrams. No doubt she planned to be imposing, too. As the focus sharpened, the edges of the screen seemed to melt away, and the image of Vasilia, if it were she, deepened and became three-dimensional. She was standing in the room with every sign of solid reality, except that the decor of the room she was in did not match the room Baley was in, and the break was a sharp one. She was wearing a dark brown skirt that divided into loose trouser legs that were semi-transparent, so that her legs from mid-thigh down were shadowily visible. Her blouse was tight and sleeveless, so that her arms were bare to the shoulder. Her neckline was low, and her hair, quite blonde, was in tight curls. She had none of her father's plainness, and certainly not his large ears. Baley could only assume she had a beautiful mother, and was fortunate in the allotment of genes. She was short, and Baley could see a remarkable resemblance to Gladia in her facial features, although her expression was far colder, and seemed to bear the mark of a dominating personality. She said sharply, "Are you the Earthman come to solve my father's problems?" "Yes, Dr. Fastolf," said Baley in an equally clipped manner. "You may call me Dr. Vasilia. I do not wish the confusion of being mistaken for my father." "Dr. Vasilia, I must have a chance to deal with you face-to-face for a reasonably extended period." "No doubt you feel that. You are, of course, an Earthman and a certain source of infection." "I have been medically treated, and I am quite safe to be with. Your father has been constantly with me for over a day." "My father pretends to be an idealist and must do foolish things at times to support the pretense. I will not imitate him." "I take it you do not wish him harm. You will bring him harm if you refuse to see me." "You are wasting time. I will not see you except in this manner, and half the period I have allotted is gone. If you wish, we can stop this now if you find it unsatisfactory." "Giscard is here, Dr. Vasilia, and would like to urge you to see me." Giscard stepped into the field of vision. "Good morning, little miss," he said in a low voice. For a moment Vasilia looked embarrassed, and when she spoke it was in a somewhat softer tone. "I am glad to view you, Giscard, and will see you any time you wish, but I will not see this Earthman, even at your urging." "In that case," said Baley, throwing in all his reserves desperately, "I must take the case of Santarix Gramianus to the public, without the benefit of having consulted you." Vasilia's eyes widened, and her hand on the table lifted upward and clenched into a fist. "What is this about Gramianus?" "Only that he is a handsome young man, and he knows you well. Am I to deal with these matters without hearing what you have to say?" "I will tell you right now that—" "No," said Baley loudly. "You will tell me nothing unless I see you face to face." Her mouth twitched. "I will see you then, but I will not remain with you 1 moment more than I choose, I warn you. And bring Giscard." The trimensional connection broke off with a snap, and Baley felt himself turn dizzy at the sudden change in background that resulted. He made his way to a chair and sat down. Giscard's hand was on his elbow, making certain that he reached the chair safely. "Can I help you in any way, sir?" he asked. "I'm all right," said Baley. "I just need to catch my breath." Dr. Fastolf was standing before him. "My apologies again for failure in my duties as a host. I listened on an extension that was equipped to receive and not transmit. I wanted to see my daughter even if she didn't see me." "I understand," said Baley, panting slightly. "If manners dictate that what you did requires an apology, then I forgive you."
"But what is this about Santarix Gramianus? The name is unfamiliar to me."
Baley looked up at Fastolf and said, "Dr. Fastolf, I heard his name from Gladia this morning. I know very little about him, but I took the chance of saying what I did to your daughter anyway. The odds were heavily against me, but the results were what I wanted them to be, nevertheless. As you see, I can make useful deductions even when I have very little information, so you had better leave me in peace to continue to do so. Please, in the future, cooperate to the full, and make no further mention of a psychic probe." Fastolf was silent, and Baley felt a grim satisfaction at having imposed his will first on the daughter, then on the father. How long he could continue to do so he did not know. Chapter 9. Vasilia. 36. Baley paused at the door of the airfoil and said firmly, "Giscard, I do not wish the windows opacified. I do not wish to sit in the back. I want to sit in the front seat and observe the outside. Since I will be sitting between you and Daniil, I should be safe enough, unless the car itself is destroyed. And in that case, we will all be destroyed, and it won't matter whether I am in front or in back." Giscard responded to the force of the statement by retreating into greater respectfulness. "Sir, if you should feel ill—" Then you will stop the car, and I will climb into the back seat, and you can opacify the rear windows. Or you needn't even stop. I can climb over the front seat while you are moving. The point is, Giscard, that it is important for me to become as acquainted with Aurora as is possible. And it is important for me, in any case, to become accustomed to the outside. I am stating this as an order, Giscard. Daniil said softly, Partner Elijah is quite correct in his request, friend Giscard. He will be reasonably safe. Giscard, perhaps reluctantly, Baley could not interpret the expression on his not-quite-human face, gave in and took his place at the controls. Baley followed and looked out of the clear glass of the windshield without quite the assurance he had presented in his voice. However, the pressure of a robot on either side was comforting. The car rose on its jets of compressed air and swayed a bit as though it were finding its footing. Baley felt a queasy sensation in the pit of his stomach and tried not to regret his brave performance of moments before. There was no use trying to tell himself that Daniil and Giscard showed no signs of fear and should be imitated. They were robots and could not feel fear. And then the car moved forward suddenly, and Baley felt himself pushed hard against the seat. Within a minute, he was moving at as fast a speed as he had ever experienced on the expressways of the city. A wide, grassy road stretched out ahead. The speed seemed the greater for the fact that there were none of the friendly lights and structures of the city on either side, but rather wide gulfs of greenery and irregular formations. Baley fought to keep his breath steady and to talk as naturally as he might of neutral things. He said, We don't seem to be passing any farmland, Daniil. This seems to be unused land. Daniil said, This is city territory, Partner Elijah. It is privately owned parkland and estates. City? Baley could not accept the word. He knew what a city was. Eos is the largest and most important city on Aurora, the first to be established. The Auroran World Legislature sits here. The chairman of the legislature has his estate here, and we will be passing it. Not only a city, but the largest. Baley looked about to either side. I was under the impression that the Fastoff and Gladia establishments were on the outskirts of Eos. I should think we would have passed the city limits by now. Not at all, Partner Elijah. We're passing through its center. The limits are 7 kilometers away, and our destination is nearly 40 kilometers beyond that. The center of the city? I see no structures. They are not meant to be seen from the road, but there's one you can make out between the trees. That is the establishment of Fouad Laborde, a well-known writer. Do you know all the establishments by sight? They are in my memory banks, said Daniil solemnly. There's no traffic on the road. Why is that? Long distances are covered by air cars or magnetic subcars. Trimensional connections, they call it viewing on Solaria, said Baley. And here, too, in informal conversation, but TVC more formally. That takes care of much communication. Finally, Aurorans are fond of walking, and it is not unusual to walk several kilometers for social visiting, or even for business meetings, where time is not of the essence. And we have to get somewhere that's too far to walk, too close for air cars, and trimensional viewing is not wanted, so we use a ground car. An airfoil, more specifically, Partner Elijah, but that qualifies as a ground car, I suppose. How long will it take to reach Vasilia's establishment? Not long, Partner Elijah. She is at the Robotics Institute, as perhaps you know. There were some moments of silence, and then Baley said, It looks cloudy near the horizon there. Giscard negotiated a curve at high speed, the airfoil tipping through an angle of some 30 degrees. Baley choked back a moan and clung to Daniil, who flung his left arm about Baley's shoulders and held him in a strong, vice-like grip, one hand on each shoulder. Slowly, Baley let out his breath as the airfoil righted itself. Daniil said, Yes, those clouds will bring precipitation later in the day, as predicted. Baley frowned. He had been caught in the rain once, during his experimental work in the field outside, on Earth. It was like standing under a cold shower with his clothes on. There had been sheer panic for a moment when he realized that there was no way in which he could reach for any controls that would turn it off. The water would come down forever. Then everyone was running, and he ran with them, making for the dryness and controllability of the city. But this was Aurora, and he had no idea what one did when it began to rain, and there was no city to escape into. Run into the nearest establishment? Would refugees automatically be welcome? Then there was another brief turn, and Giscard said, Sir, we are in the parking lot of the Robotics Institute. We can now enter and visit the establishment that Dr. Vasilia maintains on the Institute grounds." Baley nodded. The trip had taken something between 15 and 20 minutes, as nearly as he could judge, Earth time, and he was glad it was over. He said rather breathlessly, "I want to know something about Dr. Fastolf's daughter before I meet her. You did not know her, did you, Daniil?" Daniil said, "At the time I came into existence, Dr. Fastolf and his daughter had been separated for a considerable time. I have never met her." "That is for you, Giscard. You and she knew each other well, is that not so?" "It is so, sir," said Giscard impassively. "And were fond of each other?" "I believe, sir," said Giscard, "that it gave Dr. Fastolf's daughter pleasure to be with me." "Did it give you pleasure to be with her?" Giscard seemed to pick his words. "It gives me a sensation that I think is what human beings mean by pleasure to be with any human being." "But more so with Vasilia, I think. Am I right?" "Her pleasure at being with me, sir," said Giscard, "did seem to stimulate those positronic potentials that produce actions in me that are equivalent to those that pleasure produces in human beings, or so I was once told by Dr. Fastolf." Baley said suddenly, "Why did Vasilia leave her father?" Giscard said nothing. Baley said, with the sudden peremptoriness of an Earthman addressing a robot, "I asked you a question, boy." Giscard turned his head and stared at Baley, who, for a moment, thought the glow in the robot's eyes might be brightening into a blaze of resentment at the demeaning word. However, Giscard spoke mildly, and there was no readable expression in his eyes when he said, "I would like to answer, sir, but in all matters concerning that separation, Miss Vasilia ordered me at that time to say nothing." "But I'm ordering you to answer me, and I can order you very firmly indeed if I wish to." Giscard said, "I am sorry. Miss Vasilia, even at that time, was skilled in robotics, and the orders she gave me were sufficiently powerful to remain despite anything you are likely to say, sir." Baley said, "She must have been skilled in robotics, since Dr. Fastolf told me she reprogrammed you on occasion." "It was not dangerous to do so, sir. Dr. Fastolf himself could always correct any errors." "Did he have to?" "He did not, sir." "What was the nature of the reprogramming?" "Minor matters, sir." "Perhaps, but humor me. Just what was it she did?" Giscard hesitated, and Baley knew what that meant at once. The robot said, "I fear that any questions concerning the reprogramming cannot be answered by me." "You were forbidden?" "No, sir, but the reprogramming automatically wipes out what went before. If I am changed in any particular, it would seem to me that I have always been as changed, and I would have no memory of what I was before I was changed." "Then how do you know the reprogramming was minor?" "Since Dr. Fastolf never saw any need of correcting what Miss Vasilia did, or so he once told me, I can only suppose the changes were minor. You might ask Miss Vasilia, sir." "I will," said Baley. "I fear, however, that she will not answer, sir." Baley's heart sank. So far he had questioned only Dr. Fastolf, Gladia, and the two robots, all of whom had overriding reasons to cooperate. Now, for the first time, he would be facing an unfriendly subject. 37. Baley stepped out of the airfoil, which was resting on a grassy plot, and felt a certain pleasure in feeling solidity beneath his feet. He looked around in surprise, for the structures were rather thickly spread, and to his right was a particularly large one, built plainly, rather like a huge right-angled block of metal and glass. "Is that the Robotics Institute?" he asked. Daniil said, "This entire complex is the Institute, partner Elijah. You are seeing only a portion, and it is more thickly built up than is common on Aurora because it is a self-contained political entity. It contains home establishments, laboratories, libraries, communal gymnasia, and so on. The large structure is the administrative center." "This is so un-Auroran with all these buildings in view, at least judging from what I saw of Eos, that I should think there would be considerable disapproval." "I believe there was, partner Elijah, but the head of the Institute is friendly with the chairman, who has much influence, And there was a special dispensation, I understand, because of research necessities. Daniil looked about thoughtfully. It is indeed more compact than I had supposed. Than you had supposed? Have you never been here before, Daniil?
No, Partner Elijah.
How about you, Giscard?
No, sir, said Giscard.
Baley said, You found your way here without trouble, and you seem to know the place.
We have been suitably informed, Partner Elijah, said Daniil, since it was necessary that we come with you.
Baley nodded thoughtfully, then said, Why didn't Dr. Fastoff come with us? And decided once again that it made no sense to try to catch a robot off guard, ask a question rapidly or unexpectedly, and they simply waited until the question was absorbed and then answered. They were never caught off guard. Daniil said, As Dr. Fastoff said, he is not a member of the Institute and feels it would be improper to visit uninvited. But why is he not a member?
The reasons for that I have never been told, Partner Elijah.
Baley's eyes turned to Giscard, who said at once, Nor I, sir.
Did not know.
Were told not to know? Baley shrugged. It did not matter which. Human beings could lie, and robots be instructed. Of course, human beings could be browbeaten or maneuvered out of a lie, if the questioner were skillful enough or brutal enough, and robots could be maneuvered out of instruction if the questioner were skillful enough or unscrupulous enough, but the skills were different, and Baley had none at all with respect to robots. He said, Where would we be likely to find Dr. Vasilia Fastoff? Daniil said, This is her establishment immediately before us. You have been instructed, then, as to its location?
That has been imprinted in our memory banks, Partner Elijah.
Well, then, lead the way. The orange sun was well up in the sky now, and it was clearly nearing midday. As they approached Vasilia's establishment, they stepped into the shadow of the factory, and Baley twitched a little as he felt the temperature drop immediately. His lips tightened at the thought of occupying and settling worlds without cities, where the temperature was uncontrolled and subject to unpredictable, idiotic changes. And, he noted uneasily, the line of clouds at the horizon had advanced somewhat. It could also rain wherever it wished, with water cascading down. Earth, he longed for the cities. Giscard had walked into the establishment first, and Daniil held out his arm to prevent Baley from following. Of course, Giscard was reconnoitering. So was Daniil, for that matter. His eyes traversed the landscape with an intentness no human being could have duplicated. Baley was certain that those robotic eyes missed nothing. He wondered why robots were not equipped with 4 eyes, equally distributed about the perimeter of the head, or an optic strip totally circumnavigating it. Daniil could not be expected to, of course, since he had to be human in appearance, but why not Giscard? Or did that introduce complications of vision that the positronic pathways could not handle? For a moment, Baley had a faint vision of the complexities that burdened the life of a roboticist. Giscard reappeared in the doorway and nodded. Daniil's arm exerted a respectful pressure, and Baley moved forward. The door stood ajar. There was no lock on Vasilia's establishment, but there had also been none, Baley suddenly remembered, on those of Gladia and of Dr. Fastoff. A sparse population and separation helped ensure privacy, and no doubt the custom of non-interference helped, too. And, come to think of it, the ubiquitous robot guards were more efficient than any lock could be. The pressure of Daniil's hand on Baley's upper arm brought the latter to a halt. Giscard, ahead of them, was speaking in a low voice to 2 robots who were themselves rather Giscard-like. A sudden coldness struck the pit of Baley's stomach. What if some rapid maneuver substituted another robot for Giscard? Would he be able to recognize the substitution, tell 2 such robots apart? Would he be left with a robot without special instructions to guard him, one who might innocently lead him into danger and then react with insufficient quickness when protection was necessary? Controlling his voice, he said calmly to Daniil, Remarkable the similarity in those robots, Daniil. Can you tell them apart?
Certainly, Partner Elijah. Their clothing designs are different, and their code numbers are different as well.
They don't look different to me.
You are not accustomed to notice that sort of detail.
Baley stared again. What code numbers?
They are easily visible, Partner Elijah, when you know where to look,
and when your eyes are sensitive farther into the infrared than human eyes are. Well, then, I would be in trouble if I had to do the identifying, wouldn't I?
Not at all, partner Elijah. You had but to ask a robot for its full name and serial number. It would tell you.
Even if instructed to give me a false one?
Why should any robot be so instructed?
Baley decided not to explain. Giscard was, in any case, returning. He said to Baley,
"Sir, you will be received. Come this way, please."
The two robots of the establishment led. Behind them came Baley and Daniil, the latter retaining his grip protectively. Following in the rear was Giscard. The two robots stopped before a double door, which opened, apparently automatically, in both directions. The room within was suffused with a dim, grayish light, daylight diffusing through thick drapery. Baley could make out, not very clearly, a small human figure in the room, half-seated on a tall stool, with one elbow resting on a table that ran the length of the wall. Baley and Daniil entered, Giscard coming up behind them. The door closed, leaving the room dimmer than ever. A female voice said sharply, "Come no closer. Stay where you are." And the room burst into full daylight. 38. Baley blinked and looked upward. The ceiling was glassed, and through it the sun could be seen. The sun seemed oddly dim, however, and could be looked at, even though that did not seem to affect the quality of the light within. Presumably the glass, or whatever the transparent substance was, diffused the light without absorbing it. He looked down at the woman, who still maintained her pose at the stool, and said, "Dr. Vasilia Fastolf?"
"Dr. Vasilia Aliena, if you want a full name. I do not borrow the names of others. You may call me Dr. Vasilia. It is the name by which I am commonly known at the Institute." Her voice, which had been rather harsh, softened. "And how are you, my old friend Giscard?" Giscard said, in tones oddly removed from his usual one, "I greet you—" He paused and then said, "I greet you, little miss." Vasilia smiled. "And this, I suppose, is the humaniform robot of whom I have heard, Daniil Oliva?" "Yes, Dr. Vasilia," said Daniil briskly. "And finally we have the Earthman."
"Elijah Baley, Doctor," said Baley stiffly.
"Yes, I'm aware that Earthmen have names, and that Elijah Baley is yours," she said coolly. "You don't look one blasted thing like the actor who played you in the Hyperwave show."
"I'm aware of that, Doctor."
"The one who played Daniil was rather a good likeness, however, but I suppose we are not here to discuss the show."
"We are not."
"I gather we are here, Earthman, to talk about whatever it is you want to say about Santarix Gramianus and get it over with, right?"
"Not entirely,"
said Baley.
"That is not the primary reason for my coming, though I imagine we will get to it."
"Indeed? Are you under the impression that we are here to engage in a long and complicated discussion on whatever topic you choose to deal with?"
"I think, Dr. Vasilia, you would be well advised to allow me to manage this interview as I wish."
"Is that a threat?"
"No."
"Well, I have never met an Earthman, and it might be interesting to see how closely you resemble the actor who played your role, that is, in ways other than appearance. Are you really the masterful person you seemed to be in the show?"
"The show," said Baley with clear distaste, "was overdramatic and exaggerated my personality in every direction. I would rather you accept me as I am and judge me entirely from how I appear to you right now."
Vasilia laughed. "At least you don't seem overawed by me. That's a point in your favor. Or do you think this Gramianus thing you've got in mind puts you in a position to order me about?"
"I am not here to do anything but uncover the truth in the matter of the dead humaniform robot, Jander Panel."
"Dead? Was he ever alive, then?"
I use one syllable in preference to phrases such as rendered inoperative. Does saying dead confuse you?
Vasilia said, "You fence well. Debrett, bring the Earthman a chair. He will grow weary standing if this is to be a long conversation. Then get into your niche. And you may choose one, too, Daniil. Giscard, come stand by me." Baley sat down.
"Thank you, Debrett. Dr. Vasilia, I have no authority to question you. I have no legal means of forcing you to answer my questions. However, the death of Jander Panel has put your father in a position of some—"
"It has put whom in a position?"
"Your father."
"Earthman, I sometimes refer to a certain individual as my father, but no one else does. Please use a proper name."
"Dr. Hahn Fastolf. He is your father, isn't he, as a matter of record?" Basilia said, "You are using a biological term. I share genes with him in a manner characteristic of what on Earth would be considered a father-daughter relationship. This is a matter of indifference on Aurora, except in medical and genetic matters. I can conceive of my suffering from certain metabolic states in which it would be appropriate to consider the physiology and biochemistry of those with whom I share genes, parents, siblings, children, and so on. Otherwise, these relationships are not generally referred to in polite Auroran society. I explain this to you because you are an Earthman." "If I have offended against custom," said Baley, "it is through ignorance, and I apologize. May I refer to the gentleman under discussion by name?" "Certainly." "In that case, the death of Jander Panel has put Dr. Han Fastoff into a position of some difficulty, and I would assume that you would be concerned enough to desire to help him." "You assume that, do you? Why?" He brought you up. He cared for you. You had a profound affection for each other. He still feels a profound affection for you." "Did he tell you that?" "It was obvious from the details of our conversations, even from the fact that he has taken an interest in the Solarian woman, Gladia Del Mar, because of her resemblance to you." "Did he tell you that?" "He did, but even if he hadn't, the resemblance is obvious." "Nevertheless, Earthman, I owe Dr. Fastoff nothing. Your assumptions can be dismissed." Baley cleared his throat. "Aside from any personal feelings you might or might not have, there is the matter of the future of the galaxy. Dr. Fastoff wishes new worlds to be explored and settled by human beings. If the political repercussions of Jander's death lead to the exploration and settlement of the new worlds by robots, Dr. Fastoff believes that this will be catastrophic for Aurora and humanity. Surely you would not be a party to such a catastrophe." Basilia said indifferently, watching him closely, "Surely not, if I agreed with Dr. Fastoff. I do not. I see no harm in having humaniform robots doing the work. I am here at the Institute, in fact, to make that possible. I am a globalist. Since Dr. Fastoff is a humanist, he is my political enemy." Her answers were clipped and direct, no longer than they had to be. Each time there followed a definite silence, as though she were waiting with interest for the next question. Baley had the impression that she was curious about him, amused by him, making wagers with herself as to what the next question might be, determined to give him just the minimum information necessary to force another question. He said, "Have you long been a member of this institute?" "Since its formation." "Are there many members?" "I should judge about a third of Aurora's roboticists are members, though only about half of these actually live and work on the Institute grounds." "Do other members of the Institute share your views on the robotic exploration of other worlds? Do they oppose Dr. Fastoff's views, one and all?" "I suspect that most of them are globalists, but I don't know that we have taken a vote on the matter, or even discussed it formally. You had better ask them all individually." "Is Dr. Fastoff a member of the Institute?" "No." Baley waited a bit, but she said nothing beyond the negative. He said, "Isn't that surprising? I should think he, of all people, would be a member." "As it happens, we don't want him. What is perhaps less important, he doesn't want us." "Isn't that even more surprising?" "I don't think so." And then, as though goaded into saying something more by an irritation within herself, she said, "He lives in the city of Eos. I suppose you know the significance of the name, Earthman?" Baley nodded and said, "Eos is the ancient Greek goddess of the dawn, as Aurora is the ancient Roman goddess of the dawn." "Exactly. Dr. Han Fastoff lives in the city of the dawn, on the world of the dawn, but he is not himself a believer in the dawn. He does not understand the necessary method of expansion through the galaxy, of converting the spacer dawn into broad galactic day. The robotic exploration of the galaxy is the only practical way to carry the task through, and he won't accept it, or us." Baley said slowly, "Why is it the only practical method? Aurora and the other spacer worlds were not explored and settled by robots, but by human beings." "Correction, by Earth people. It was a wasteful and inefficient procedure, and there are now no Earth people that we will allow to serve as further settlers. We have become spacers, long-lived and healthy, and we have robots who are infinitely more versatile and flexible than those available to the human beings who originally settled our worlds. Times and matters are wholly different, and today only robotic exploration is feasible." Let us suppose you are right and Dr. Fastoff is wrong. Even so, he has a logical view. Why won't he and the Institute accept each other, simply because they disagree on this point?
No, this disagreement is comparatively minor. There is a more fundamental conflict.
Again Baley paused, and again she added nothing to her remark. He did not feel it safe to display irritation, so he said quietly, almost tentatively, "What is the more fundamental conflict?" The amusement in Vasilia's voice came nearer the surface. It softened the lines of her face somewhat, and for a moment she looked more like Gladia. "You couldn't guess unless it were explained to you, I think." "Precisely why I am asking, Dr. Vasilia."
"Well then, Earthman,
I have been told that Earth people are short-lived. I have not been misled in that, have I?" Baley shrugged. "Some of us live to be 100 years old, Earth time." He thought a bit. "Perhaps 130 or so metric years."
"And how old are you?"
45 standard, 60 metric.
"I am 66 metric.
I expect to live 3 metric centuries more, at least, if I'm careful." Baley spread his hands wide. "I congratulate you."
"There are disadvantages."
"I was told this morning that in 3 or 4 centuries many, many losses have a chance to accumulate."
"I'm afraid so," said Vasilia. "And many, many gains have a chance to accumulate as well. On the whole, it balances."
"What, then, are the disadvantages?"
"You are not a scientist, of course."
"I'm a plainclothesman, a policeman, if you like."
"But perhaps you know scientists on your world."
"I have met some," said Baley cautiously.
"You know how they work. We are told that on Earth they cooperate out of necessity. They have at most half a century of active labor in the course of their short lives, less than 7 metric decades. Not much can be done in that time."
"Some of our scientists had accomplished quite a deal in considerably less time."
"Because they have taken advantage of the findings others have made before them and profit from the use they can make of contemporary findings by others. Isn't that so?"
"Of course, we have a scientific community to which all contribute across the expanse of space and of time."
"Exactly. It won't work otherwise. Each scientist, aware of the unlikelihood of accomplishing much entirely by himself, is forced into the community, cannot help becoming part of the clearinghouse. Progress thus becomes enormously greater than it would be if this did not exist."
"Is not this the case on Aurora and the other spacer worlds, too?" asked Baley.
"In theory it is. In practice, not so much. The pressures in a long-lived society are less. Scientists here have 3 or 3.5 centuries to devote to a problem, so that the thought arises that significant progress may be made in that time by a solitary worker. It becomes possible to feel a kind of intellectual greed, to want to accomplish something on your own, to assume a property right to a particular facet of progress, to be willing to see the general advance slowed, rather than give up what you conceive to be yours alone. And the general advance is slowed on spacer worlds as a result, to the point where it is difficult to outpace the work done on Earth, despite our enormous advantages."
"I assume you wouldn't say this if I were not to take it that Dr. Hahn Fastoff behaves in this manner."
"He certainly does. It is his theoretical analysis of the positronic brain that has made the humaniform robot possible. He has used it to construct, with the help of the late Dr. Sarton, your robot friend Daniil, but he has not published the important details of his theory, nor does he make it available to anyone else. In this way, he, and he alone, holds a stranglehold on the production of humaniform robots."
Baley furrowed his brow. "And the Robotics Institute is dedicated to cooperation among scientists?"
"Exactly. The Institute is made up of over 100 top-notch roboticists of different ages, advancements, and skills that we hope to establish branches on other worlds and make it an interstellar association. All of us are dedicated to communicating our separate discoveries or speculations to the common fund, doing voluntarily for the general good what you Earth people do perforce because you live such short lives. This, however, Dr. Hahn Fastoff will not do. I'm sure you think of Dr. Hahn Fastoff as a nobly idealistic Auroran patriot, but he will not put his intellectual property, as he thinks of it, into the common fund, and therefore he does not want us. And because he assumes a personal property right upon scientific discoveries, we do not want him. You no longer find the mutual distaste a mystery, I take it." Baley nodded his head, then said, "You think this will work, this voluntary giving up of personal glory?" "It must," said Vasilia grimly.
And as the Institute, through community endeavor, duplicated Dr. Fastoff's individual work and rediscovered the theory of the humaniform positronic brain, we will in time. It is inevitable. And you are making no attempt to shorten the time it will take by persuading Dr. Fastoff to yield the secret?
I think we are on the way to persuading him.
Through the working of the Jander scandal?
I don't think you really have to ask that question.
Well, have I told you what you wanted to know, Earthman?
Baley said,
You have told me some things I didn't know.
Then it is time for you to tell me about Gramianus. Why have you brought up the name of this barber in connection with me?
Barber?
He considers himself a hairstylist, among other things, but he is a barber, plain and simple. Tell me about him, or let us consider this interview at an end.
Baley felt weary. It seemed clear to him that Vasilia had enjoyed the fencing. She had given him enough to whet his appetite, and now he would be forced to buy additional material with information of his own. But he had none, or at least he had only guesses, and if any of them were wrong, vitally wrong, he was through. He therefore fenced on his own. You understand, Dr. Vasilia, that you can't get away with pretending that it is farcical to suppose there is a connection between Gramianus and yourself.
Why not, when it is farcical?
No. If it were farcical, you would have laughed in my face and shut off trimensional contact. The mere fact that you were willing to abandon your earlier stand and receive me, the mere fact that you have been talking to me at length and telling me a great many things, is a clear admission that you feel that I just possibly might have my knife at your jugular.
Vasilia's jaw muscles tightened, and she said, in a low and angry voice, See here, little Earthman, my position is vulnerable, and you probably know it. I am the daughter of Dr. Fastoff, and there are some here at the Institute who are foolish enough, or knavish enough, to mistrust me, therefore. I don't know what kind of story you may have heard, or made up, but that it's more or less farcical is certain. Nevertheless, no matter how farcical, it might be used effectively against me, so I am willing to trade for it. I have told you some things, and I might tell you more, but only if you now tell me what you have in your hand and convince me you are telling me the truth. So tell me now, if you try to play games with me, I will be in no worse position than at present if I kick you out, and I will at least get pleasure out of that. And I will use what leverage I have with the chairman to get him to cancel his decision to let you come here and have you sent right back to Earth. There is considerable pressure on him now to do this, and you won't want the addition of mine. So talk, now. 39. Baley's impulse was to lead up to the crucial point, feeling his way to see if he were right. That, he felt, would not work. She would see what he was doing, she was no fool, and would stop him. He was on the track of something, he knew, and he didn't want to spoil it. What she said about her vulnerable position as the result of her relationship to her father might well be true, but still she would not have been frightened into seeing him if she hadn't suspected that some notion he had was not completely farcical. He had to come out with something, then, with something important that would establish, at once, some sort of domination over her. Therefore, the gamble. He said, Santarix Gramianus offered himself to you. And before Vasilia could react, he raised the ante by saying, with an added touch of harshness, and not once, but many times. Vasilia clasped her hands over one knee, then pulled herself up and seated herself on the stool as though to make herself more comfortable. She looked at Giscard, who stood motionless and expressionless at her side. Then she looked at Baley and said, Well, the idiot offers himself to everyone he sees, regardless of age and sex. I would be unusual if he paid me no attention. Baley made the gesture of brushing that to one side. She had not laughed. She had not brought the interview to an end. She had not even put on a display of fury. She was waiting to see what he would build out of the statement. So he did have something by the tail. He said, That is exaggeration, Dr. Vasilia. No one, however undiscriminating, would fail to make choices, and in the case of this Gramianus, you were selected, and despite your refusal to accept him, he continued to offer himself, quite out of keeping with Auroran custom. Vasilia said, I am glad you realize I refused him. There are some who feel that, as a matter of courtesy, any offer, or almost any offer, should be accepted, but that is not my opinion. I see no reason why I have to subject myself to some uninteresting event that will merely waste my time. Do you find something objectionable in that, Earthman? I have no opinion to offer, either favorable or unfavorable, in connection with Auroran custom. She was still waiting, listening to him. What was she waiting for?
Would it be for what he wanted to say, but yet wasn't sure he dared to? She said with an effort at lightness, "Do you have anything at all to offer, or are we through?" "Not through," said Baley, who was now forced to take another gamble. "You recognized this non-Auroran perseverance in Gramianus, and it occurred to you that you could make use of it." "Really? How mad! What possible use could I make of it?" "Since he was clearly attracted to you very strongly, it would not be difficult to arrange to have him attracted by another who resembled you very closely. You urged him to do so, perhaps promising to accept him if the other did not." "Who is this poor woman who resembles me closely?" "You do not know? Come now, that is naive, Dr. Vasilia. I am talking of the Solarian woman, Gladia, whom I already have said has come under the protection of Dr. Fastoff precisely because she does resemble you. You expressed no surprise when I referred to this at the beginning of our talk. It is too late to pretend ignorance now." Vasilia looked at him sharply. "And from his interest in her, you deduced that he must first have been interested in me? It was this wild guess with which you approached me?" "Not entirely a wild guess. There are other substantiating factors. Do you deny all this?" She brushed thoughtfully at the long desk beside her, and Baley wondered what details were carried with the long sheets of paper on it. He could make out from a distance complexities of patterns that he knew would be totally meaningless to him, no matter how carefully and thoroughly he studied them. Vasilia said, "I grow weary. You have told me that Gramianus was interested first in me, and then in my look-alike, the Solarian, and now you want me to deny it? Why should I take the trouble to deny it? Of what importance is it? Even if it were true, how could this damage me in any way? You are saying that I was annoyed by attentions I didn't want, and that I ingeniously deflected them. Well?" Baley said, "It is not so much what you did as why. You knew that Gramianus was the type of person who would be persistent. He had offered himself to you over and over, and he would offer himself to Gladia over and over." "If she would refuse him." "She was a Solarian, having trouble with sex, and was refusing everyone, something I dare say you knew, since I imagine that for all your estrangement from Dr. Fastoff, you have enough feeling to keep an eye on your replacement." "Well, then, good for her. If she refused Gramianus, she showed good taste." "You knew there was no if about it. You knew she would." "Still, what of it?" "Repeated offers to her would mean that Gramianus would be in Gladia's establishment frequently, that he would cling to her." "One last time. Well?" "And in Gladia's establishment was a very unusual object, one of the two humaniform robots in existence, Jander Panel." Vasilia hesitated. Then, "What are you driving at?" "I think it struck you that if somehow the humaniform robot were killed under circumstances that would implicate Dr. Fastoff, that could be used as a weapon to force the secret of the humaniform positronic brain out of him. Gramianus, annoyed over Gladia's persistent refusal to accept him, and given the opportunity by his constant presence at Gladia's establishment, could be induced to seek a fearful revenge by killing the robot." Vasilia blinked rapidly. "That poor barber might have 20 such motives and 20 such opportunities, and it wouldn't matter. He wouldn't know how to order a robot to shake hands with any efficiency. How would he manage to come within a light year of imposing mental freeze-out on a robot?" "Which now," said Baley softly, "finally brings us to the point. A point I think you have been anticipating, for you have somehow restrained yourself from throwing me out because you had to make sure whether I had this point in mind or not. What I'm saying is that Gramianus did the job, with the help of this Robotics Institute, working through you." Chapter 10. Again Vasilia. 40. It was as though a hyperwave drama had come to a halt in a holographic still. None of the robots moved, of course, but neither did Baley, and neither did Dr. Vasilia Aliena. Long seconds, abnormally long ones, passed before Vasilia let out her breath and, very slowly, rose to her feet. Her face had tightened itself into a humorless smile, and her voice was low. "You are saying, Earthman, that I am an accessory in the destruction of the humaniform robot?" Baley said, "Something of the sort had occurred to me, Doctor." "Thank you for the thought. The interview is over, and you will leave." She pointed to the door. Baley said, "I'm afraid I do not wish to." "I don't consult your wishes, Earthman." "You must, for how can you make me leave against my wishes?" I have robots who, at my request, will put you out politely but firmly and without hurting anything but your self-esteem, if you have any. You have but one robot here. I have 2 that will not allow that to happen. I have 20 on instant call. Baley said, Dr. Vasilia, please understand. You were surprised at seeing Daniil. I suspect that even though you work at the Robotics Institute, where humaniform robots are the first order of business, you have never actually seen a completed and functioning one. Your robots, therefore, haven't seen one either. Now look at Daniil. He looks human. He looks more human than any robot who has ever existed, except for the dead Jander. To your robots, Daniil will surely look human. He will know how to present an order in such a way that they will obey him in preference, perhaps, to you. Vasilia said, I can, if necessary, summon 20 human beings from within the Institute who will put you out, perhaps with a little damage, and your robots, even Daniil, will not be able to interfere effectively. How do you intend to call them, since my robots are not going to allow you to move? They have extraordinarily quick reflexes. Vasilia showed her teeth in something that could not be called a smile. I cannot speak for Daniil, but I've known Giscard for most of my life. I don't think he will do anything to keep me from summoning help, and I imagine he will keep Daniil from interfering, too. Baley tried to keep his voice from trembling as he skated on ever thinner ice, and knew it. He said, Before you do anything, perhaps you might ask Giscard what he will do if you and I give conflicting orders. Giscard, said Vasilia with supreme confidence. Giscard's eyes turned full on Vasilia, and he said, with an odd timbre to his voice, Little miss, I am compelled to protect Mr. Baley. He takes precedence. Indeed? By whose order? By this Earthman's, this stranger's? Giscard said, By Dr. Hahn Fastoff's order. Vasilia's eyes flashed, and she slowly sat down on the stool again. Her hands, resting in her lap, trembled, and she said, through lips that scarcely moved, He's even taken you away. If that is not enough, Dr. Vasilia, said Daniil, speaking suddenly, of his own accord, I, too, would place partner Elijah's welfare above yours. Vasilia looked at Daniil with bitter curiosity. Partner Elijah, is that what you call him? Yes, Dr. Vasilia. My choice in this matter, the Earthman over you, arises not only out of Dr. Fastoff's instructions, but because the Earthman and I are partners in this investigation, and because— Daniil paused as though puzzled by what he was about to say, and then said it anyway. We are friends. Vasilia said, Friends? An Earthman and a humaniform robot? Well, there is a match. Neither quite human. Baley said sharply, Nevertheless bound by friendship. Do not, for your own sake, test the force of our— Now it was he who paused, and, as though to his own surprise, completed the sentence impossibly, Love. Vasilia turned to Baley. What do you want? Information. I have been called to Aurora, this world of the dawn, to straighten out an event that does not seem to have an easy explanation, one in which Dr. Fastoff stands falsely accused, with the possibility, therefore, of terrible consequences for your world and mine. Daniil and Giscard understand this situation well, and know that nothing but the first law, at its fullest and most immediate, can take precedence over my efforts to solve the mystery. Since they have heard what I have said, and know that you might possibly be an accessory to the deed, they understand that they must not allow this interview to end. Therefore, I say again, don't risk the actions they may be forced to take if you refuse to answer my questions. I have accused you of being an accessory in the murder of Jander Panel. Do you deny that accusation or not? You must answer. Vasilia said bitterly, I will answer. Never fear. Murder? A robot is put out of commission, and that's murder? Well, I do deny it, murder or whatever. I deny it with all possible force. I have not given Gramianus information on robotics for the purpose of allowing him to put an end to Jander. I don't know enough to do so, and I suspect that no one else at the Institute knows enough. Baley said, I can't say whether you know enough to have helped commit the crime or whether anyone at the Institute knows enough. We can, however, discuss motive. First, you might have a feeling of tenderness for this Gramianus. However much you might reject his offers, however contemptible you might find him as a possible lover, would it be so strange that you would feel flattered by his persistence, sufficiently so to be willing to help him if he turned to you prayerfully and without any sexual demands with which to annoy you? You mean he may have come to me and said, "Vasilia, dear, I want to put a robot out of commission. Please tell me how to do it, and I will be terribly grateful to you." And I would say, "Why, certainly, dear, I would just love to help you commit a crime." Preposterous! No one except an Earthman who knows nothing of Auroran ways could believe anything like this could happen. It would take a particularly stupid Earthman, too. Perhaps, but all possibilities must be considered. For instance, as a second possibility, might you yourself not be jealous over the fact that Gramianus has switched his affections so that you might help him not out of abstract tenderness, but out of a very concrete desire to win him back? Jealous? That is an earthly emotion. If I do not wish Gramianus for myself, how can I possibly care whether he offers himself to another woman and she accepts, or for that matter, if another woman offers herself to him and he accepts? I have been told before that sexual jealousy is unknown on Aurora, and I am willing to admit that is true in theory. But such theories rarely hold up in practice. There are surely some exceptions. What's more, jealousy is all too often an irrational emotion, and not to be dismissed by mere logic. Still, let us leave that for the moment. As a third possibility, you might be jealous of Gladia and wish to do her harm, even if you don't care the least bit for Gramianus yourself. Jealous of Gladia? I've never even seen her, except once on the hyperwave when she arrived in Aurora. The fact that people have commented on her resemblance to me every once in a long while hasn't bothered me. Does it perhaps bother you that she is Dr. Fastolf's ward, his favorite, almost the daughter that you were once? She has replaced you. She is welcome to that. I could not care less. Even if they were lovers? Vasilia stared at Baley with growing fury, and beads of perspiration appeared at her hairline. She said, "There is no need to discuss this. You have asked me to deny the allegation that I was accessory to what you call murder, and I have denied it. I have said I lacked the ability and I lacked the motive. You are welcome to present your case to all Aurora. Present your foolish attempts at supplying me with a motive. Maintain, if you wish, that I have the ability to do so. You will get nowhere, absolutely nowhere." And even while she trembled with anger, it seemed to Baley that there was conviction in her voice. She did not fear the accusation. She had agreed to see him, so he was on the track of something that she feared, perhaps feared desperately, but she did not fear this. Where, then, had he gone wrong? 41. Baley said, troubled, casting about for some way out. "Suppose I accept your statement, Dr. Vasilia. Suppose I agree that my suspicion that you might have been an accessory in this roboticide was wrong. Even that would not mean that it is impossible for you to help me." "Why should I help you?" Baley said, "Out of human decency. Dr. Hahn Fastolf assures us he did not do it, that he is not a robot killer, that he did not put this particular robot Jander out of operation. You've known Dr. Fastolf better than anyone ever has, one would suppose. You spent years in an intimate relationship with him as a beloved child and growing daughter. You saw him at times and under conditions that no one else saw him. Whatever your present feelings toward him might be, the past is not changed by them. Knowing him as you do, you must be able to bear witness that his character is such that he could not harm a robot, certainly not a robot that is one of his supreme achievements. Would you be willing to bear such witness openly? To all the worlds? It would help a great deal." Vasilia's face seemed to harden. "Understand me," she said, pronouncing the words distinctly. "I will not be involved." "You must be involved." "Why?" "Do you owe nothing to your father? He is your father. Whether the word means anything to you or not, there is a biological connection. And besides that, father or not, he took care of you, nurtured and brought you up for years. You owe him something for that." Vasilia trembled. It was a visible shaking, and her teeth were chattering. She tried to speak, failed, took a deep breath, another, then tried again. She said, "Giscard, do you hear all that is going on?" Giscard bowed his head. "Yes, little miss." "And you, the humaniform, Daniil?" "Yes, Dr. Vasilia." "You hear all this, too?" "Yes, Dr. Vasilia." "You both understand the Earthman insists that I bear evidence on Dr. Fastolf's character?" Both nodded. "Then I will speak. against my will and in anger. It is because I have felt that I did owe this father of mine some minimum consideration as my gene-bearer and, after a fashion, my upbringer, that I have not borne witness. But now I will. Earthman, listen to me. Dr. Hahn Fastoff, some of whose genes I share, did not take care of me, as a separate, distinct human being. I was to him nothing more than an experiment, an observational phenomenon. Baley shook his head. That is not what I was asking. She drove furiously over him. You insisted that I speak, and I will speak, and it will answer you. One thing interests Dr. Hahn Fastoff. One thing only. That is the functioning of the human brain. He wishes to reduce it to equations, to a writing diagram, to a solved maze, and thus found a mathematical science of human behavior which will allow him to predict the human future. He calls the science psychohistory. I can't believe that you have talked to him for as little as an hour without his mentioning it. It is the monomania that drives him. Vasilia searched Baley's face and cried out in a fierce joy, I can tell. He has talked to you about it. Then he must have told you that he is interested in robots only insofar as they can bring him to the human brain. He is interested in humaniform robots only insofar as they can bring him still closer to the human brain. Yes, he's told you that, too. The basic theory that made humaniform robots possible arose, I am quite certain, out of his attempt to understand the human brain, and he hugs that theory to himself and will allow no one else to see it because he wants to solve the problem of the human brain totally by himself in the 2 centuries or so he has left. Everything is subordinate to that, and that most certainly included me. Baley, trying to breast his way against the flood of fury, said in a low voice, In what way did it include you, Dr. Vasilia? When I was born, I should have been placed with others of my kind, with professionals who knew how to care for infants. I should not have been kept by myself in the charge of an amateur, father or not, scientist or not. Dr. Fastoff should not have been allowed to subject a child to such an environment, and would not, if he had been anyone else but Hahn Fastoff. He used all his prestige to bring it about, called in every debt he had, persuaded every key person he could, until he had control of me. He loved you, muttered Baley. Loved me? Any other infant would have done as well, but no other infant was available. What he wanted was a growing child in his presence, a developing brain. He wanted to make a careful study of the method of its development, the fashion of its growth. He wanted a human brain in simple form, growing complex, so that he could study it in detail. For that purpose, he subjected me to an abnormal environment and to subtle experimentation with no consideration for me as a human being at all. I can't believe that. Even if he were interested in you as an experimental object, he could still care for you as a human being. No, you speak as an Earthman. Perhaps on Earth there is some sort of regard for biological connections. Here there is not. I was an experimental object to him, period. Even if that were so to start with, Dr. Fastoff couldn't help but learn to love you, a helpless object entrusted to his care. Even if there were no biological connection at all, even if you were an animal, let us say, he would have learned to love you. Oh, would he now? She said bitterly. You don't know the force of indifference in a man like Dr. Fastoff. If it would have advanced his knowledge to snuff out my life, he would have done so without hesitation. That is ridiculous, Dr. Vasilia. His treatment of you was so kind and considerate that it evoked love from you. I know that. You offered yourself to him. He told you that, did he? Yes, he would. Not for a moment, even today, would he stop to question whether such a revelation might not embarrass me. Yes, I offered myself to him, and why not? He was the only human being I really knew. He was superficially gentle to me, and I didn't understand his true purposes. He was a natural target for me. Then, too, he saw to it that I was introduced to sexual stimulation under controlled conditions, the controls he set up. It was inevitable that eventually I would turn to him. I had to, for there was no one else. And he refused. And you hated him for that? No, not at first, not for years. Even though my sexual development was stunted and distorted, with effects I feel to this day, I did not blame him. I did not know enough. I found excuses for him. He was busy. He had others. He needed older women. You would be astonished at the ingenuity with which I uncovered reasons for his refusal. It was only years later that I became aware that something was wrong, and I managed to bring it out openly face to face. "Why did you refuse me?" I asked. "Obliging me might have put me on the right track, solved everything." She paused, swallowing, and for a moment covered her eyes. Baley waited, frozen with embarrassment. The robots were expressionless, incapable, for all Baley knew, of experiencing any balance or imbalance of the positronic pathways that would produce a sensation in any way analogous to human embarrassment. She said, calmer, "He avoided the question for as long as he could, but I faced him with it over and over. Why did you refuse me? Why did you refuse me?" He had no hesitation in engaging in sex. I knew of several occasions. I remember wondering if he simply preferred men. Where children are not involved, personal preference in such things is not of any importance, and some men can find women distasteful, or for that matter, vice versa. It was not so with this man you call my father, however. He enjoyed women, sometimes young women, as young as I was when I first offered myself. "Why did you refuse me?" He finally answered me, and you are welcome to guess what that answer was. She paused and waited sardonically. Baley stirred uneasily and said in a mumble, "He didn't want to make love to his daughter." "Oh, don't be a fool. What difference does that make? Considering that hardly any man on Aurora knows who his daughter is, any man making love to any woman a few decades younger might be... But never mind, it's self-evident." What he answered, and oh, how I remember the words, was, "You great fool, if I involved myself with you in that manner, how could I maintain my objectivity, and of what use would my continuing study of you be?" By that time, you see, I knew of his interest in the human brain. I was even following in his footsteps and becoming a roboticist in my own right. I worked with Giscard in this direction and experimented with his programming. I did it very well, too, didn't I, Giscard? Giscard said, "So you did, little miss. But I could see that this man whom you call my father did not view me as a human being. He was willing to see me distorted for life rather than risk his objectivity. His observations meant more to him than my normality. From that time on, I knew what I was and what he was, and I left him." The silence hung heavy in the air. Baley's head was throbbing slightly. He wanted to ask, could you not take into account the self-centeredness of a great scientist, the importance of a great problem? Could you make no allowances for something spoken perhaps in irritation at being forced to discuss what one did not want to discuss? Was not Vasilia's own anger just now much the same thing? Did not Vasilia's concentration on her own normality, whatever she meant by that, to the exclusion of perhaps the two most important problems facing humanity, the nature of the human brain and the settling of the galaxy, represent an equal self-centeredness with much less excuse? But he could ask none of those things. He did not know how to put it so that it would make real sense to this woman, nor was he sure he would understand her if she answered. What was he doing on this world? He could not understand their ways, no matter how they explained, nor could they understand his. He said wearily, "I am sorry, Dr. Vasilia. I understand that you are angry, but if you would dismiss your anger for a moment and consider, instead, the matter of Dr. Fastoff and the murdered robot, could you not see that we are dealing with two different things? Dr. Fastoff might have wanted to observe you in a detached and objective way, even at the cost of your unhappiness, and yet be light years removed from the desire to destroy an advanced humaniform robot." Vasilia reddened. She shouted, "Don't you understand what I'm telling you, Earthman? Do you think I have told you what I have just told you because I think you or anyone would be interested in the sad story of my life? For that matter, do you think I enjoy revealing myself in this manner? I'm telling you this only to show you that Dr. Hahn Fastoff, my biological father, as you never tire of pointing out, did destroy Jander. Of course he did. I have refrained from saying so because no one, until you, was idiot enough to ask me, and because of some foolish remnant of consideration I have for that man. But now that you have asked me, I say so, and by Aurora I will continue to say so, to anyone and everyone, publicly if necessary. Dr. Hahn Fastoff did destroy Jander Panel. I am certain of it. Does that satisfy you?" 42. Baley stared at the distraught woman in horror. He stuttered and began again. "I don't understand at all, Dr. Vasilia. Please quiet down and consider. Why should Dr. Fastoff destroy the robot? What has that to do with his treatment of you? Do you imagine it is some kind of retaliation against you? Vasilia was breathing rapidly. Baley noted absently and without conscious intention that although Vasilia was as small-boned as Gladia was, her breasts were larger, and she seemed to wrench at her voice to keep it under control. She said, "I told you, Earthman, did I not, that Hahn Fastoff was interested in observing the human brain? He did not hesitate to put it under stress in order to observe the results. And he preferred brains that were out of the ordinary, that of an infant, for instance, so that he might watch their development. Any brain but a commonplace one." "But what has that to do?" "Ask yourself, then, why he gained this interest in the foreign woman." "In Gladia? I asked him, and he told me. She reminded me of you, and the resemblance is indeed distinct." "And when you told me this earlier, I was amused and asked if you believed him. I ask again, do you believe him?" "Why shouldn't I believe him?" "Because it's not true. The resemblance may have attracted his attention, but the real key to his interest is that the foreign woman is foreign. She had been brought up in Solaria, under assumptions and social axioms not like those on Aurora. He could therefore study a brain that was differently molded from ours, and could gain an interesting perspective. Don't you understand that? For that matter, why is he interested in you, Earthman? Is he silly enough to imagine that you can solve an Auroran problem when you know nothing about Aurora?" Daniil suddenly intervened again, and Baley started at the sound of the other's voice. Daniil said, "Dr. Vasilia, partner Elijah solved a problem on Solaria, though he knew nothing of Solaria." "Yes," said Vasilia sourly. "So all the world's noted on that hyperwave program. And lightning may strike, too, but I don't think that Hahn Fastoff is confident it will strike twice in the same place in rapid succession. No, Earthman, he was attracted to you in the first place because you are an Earthman. You possess another alien brain he can study and manipulate." "Surely you cannot believe, Dr. Vasilia, that he would risk matters of vital importance to Aurora and call in someone he knew to be useless merely to study an unusual brain?" "Of course he would. Isn't that the whole point of what I am telling you? There is no crisis that could face Aurora that he would believe for a single moment to be as important as solving the problem of the brain. I can tell you exactly what he would say if you were to ask him. Aurora might rise or fall, flourish or decay, and that would all be of little concern compared to the problem of the brain, for if human beings really understood the brain, all that might have been lost in the course of a millennium of neglect or wrong decisions would be regained in a decade of cleverly directed human development guided by his dream of psychohistory. He would use the same argument to justify anything, lies, cruelty, anything, by merely saying that it is all intended to serve the purpose of advancing the knowledge of the brain." "I can't imagine that Dr. Fastoff would be cruel. He is the gentlest of men." "Is he? How long have you been with him?" Baley said, "A few hours on Earth 3 years ago. A day now here on Aurora." "A whole day. A whole day. I was with him for 30 years, almost constantly, and I have followed his career from a distance with some attention ever since. And you have been with him a whole day, Earthman? Well, on that one day, has he done nothing that frightened or humiliated you?" Baley kept silent. He thought of the sudden attack with the Spicer from which Daniil had rescued him, of the personal that presented him with such difficulty, thanks to its masked nature, the extended walk outside designed to test his ability to adapt to the open. Vasilia said, "I see he did. Your face, Earthman, is not quite the mask of disguise you may think it is. Did he threaten you with a psychic probe?" Baley said, "It was mentioned." "One day, and it was already mentioned. I assume it made you feel uneasy?" "It did." "And that there was no reason to mention it?" "Oh, but there was," said Baley quickly. "I had said that for a moment I had a thought which I then lost, and it was certainly legitimate to suggest that a psychic probe might help me relocate that thought." Vasilia said, "No, it wasn't. The psychic probe cannot be used with sufficient delicacy of touch for that, and if it were attempted, the chances would be considerable that there would be permanent brain damage." "Surely not if it were wielded by an expert, by Dr. Fastoff, for instance." "By him? He doesn't know one end of the probe from the other. He is a theoretician, not a technician." "By someone else, then. He did not, in actual fact, specify himself." "No, Earthman, by no one. Think, think.
If the psychic probe could be used on human beings safely by anyone, and if Han Fastoff were so concerned about the problem of the inactivation of the robot, then why didn't he suggest the psychic probe be used on himself?
On himself?
Don't tell me this hasn't occurred to you. Any thinking person would come to the conclusion that Fastoff is guilty. The only point in favor of his innocence is that he himself insists he is innocent. Well, then, why does he not offer to prove his innocence by being psychically probed and showing that no trace of guilt can be dredged up from the recesses of his brain? Has he suggested such a thing, Earthman?
No, he hasn't. At least, not to me.
Because he knows very well that it is deadly dangerous. Yet he does not hesitate to suggest it in your case, merely to observe how your brain works under pressure, how you react to fright. Or perhaps it occurs to him that, however dangerous the probe is to you, it may come up with some interesting data for him, as far as the details of your earth-molded brain are concerned. Tell me, then, isn't that cruel?
Baley brushed it aside with a tight gesture of his right arm. How does this apply to the actual case, to the roboticide?
The Solarian woman, Gladia, caught my one-time father's eye. She had an interesting brain for his purposes. He therefore gave her the robot, Jander, to see what would happen if a woman not raised on Aurora were faced with a robot that seemed human in every particular. He knew that an Auroran woman would very likely make use of the robot for sex immediately and have no trouble doing so. I myself would have some trouble, I admit, because I was not brought up normally, but no ordinary Auroran would. The Solarian woman, on the other hand, would have a great deal of trouble because she was brought up on an extremely robotic world and had unusually rigid mental attitudes toward robots. The difference, you see, might be very instructive to my father, who tried out of these variations to build his theory of brain functioning. Han Fastoff waited half a year for the Solarian woman to get to the point where she could perhaps begin making the first experimental approaches.
Baley interrupted. Your father knew nothing at all about the relationship between Gladia and Jander.
Who told you that, Earthman? My father? Gladia? If the former, he was naturally lying. If the latter, she simply didn't know, very likely. You may be sure Fastoff knew what was going on. He had to. For it must have been part of his study of how a human brain was bent under Solarian conditions. And then he thought, and I am as sure of this as I would be if I could read his thoughts, what would happen now, at the point where the woman is just beginning to rely on Jander, if suddenly, without reason, she lost him? He knew what an Auroran woman would do. She would feel some disappointment and then seek out some substitute. But what would a Solarian woman do? So he arranged to put Jander out of commission.
Destroy an immensely valuable robot just to satisfy a trivial curiosity?
Monstrous, isn't it? But that's what Han Fastoff would do. So go back to him, Earthman, and tell him that his little game is over. If the planet generally doesn't believe him to be guilty now, they most certainly will after I have had my say. 43. For a long moment, Baley sat there, stunned, while Vasilia looked at him with a kind of grim delight, her face looking harsh and totally unlike that of Gladia. There seemed nothing to do. Baley got to his feet, feeling old, much older than his 45 standard years, a child's age to these Aurorans. So far, everything he had done had led to nothing, to worse than nothing, for at every one of his moves the ropes seemed to tighten about Fastoff. He looked upward at the transparent ceiling. The sun was quite high, but perhaps it had passed its zenith, as it was dimmer than ever. Lines of thin clouds obscured it intermittently. Vasilia seemed to become aware of this from his upward glance. Her arm moved on the section of the long bench near which she was sitting, and the transparency of the ceiling vanished. At the same time, a brilliant light suffused the room, bearing the same faint orange tinge that the sun itself had. She said, "I think the interview is over. I shall have no reason to see you again, Earthman, or you me. Perhaps you had better leave Aurora. You have done—" She smiled humorlessly and said the next words almost savagely, "My father enough damage, though scarcely as much as he deserves." Baley took a step toward the door, and his two robots closed in on him. Giscard said in a low voice, "Are you well, sir?" Baley shrugged. What was there to answer to that? Vasilia called out, "Giscard, when Dr. Fastoff finds he has no further use for you, come join my staff?" Giscard looked at her calmly. "If Dr. Fastoff permits, I will do so, little miss."
Her smile grew warm. "Please do so, Giscard. I've never stopped missing you." "I often think of you, little miss." Baley turned at the door. "Dr. Vasilia, would you have a personal I might use?" Vasilia's eyes widened. "Of course not, Earthman. There are community personals here and there at the Institute. Your robot should be able to guide you." He stared at her and shook his head. It was not surprising that she wanted no Earthman infecting her rooms, and yet it angered him just the same. He said out of anger, rather than out of any rational judgment, "Dr. Vasilia, I would not, were I you, speak of the guilt of Dr. Fastolf." "What is there to stop me?" "The danger of the general uncovering of your dealings with Gramianus. The danger to you." "Don't be ridiculous. You have admitted there was no conspiracy between myself and Gramianus." "Not really. I agreed there seemed reason to conclude there was no direct conspiracy between you and Gramianus to destroy Jander. There remains the possibility of an indirect conspiracy." "You are mad. What is an indirect conspiracy?" "I am not ready to discuss that in front of Dr. Fastolf's robots, unless you insist. And why should you? You know very well what I mean." There was no reason why Baley should think she would accept this bluff. It might simply worsen the situation still further, but it didn't. Vasilia seemed to shrink within herself, frowning. Baley thought, there is then an indirect conspiracy, whatever it might be, and this might hold her till she sees through my bluff. Baley said, his spirits rising a little, "I repeat, say nothing about Dr. Fastolf." But of course he didn't know how much time he had bought. Perhaps very little. Chapter 11. Gramianus. 44. They were sitting in the airfoil again, all three in the front, with Baley once more in the middle and feeling the pressure on either side. Baley was grateful to them for the care they unfailingly gave him, even though they were only machines, helpless to disobey instructions. And then he thought, why dismiss them with a word, machines? They're good machines in a universe of sometimes evil people. I have no right to favor the machines versus people subcategorization over the good versus evil one. And Daniil, at least, I cannot think of as a machine. Giscard said, "I must ask again, sir. Do you feel well?" Baley nodded. "Quite well, Giscard. I am glad to be out here with you, too." The sky was, for the most part, white, off-white, actually. There was a gentle wind, and it had felt distinctly cool until they got into the car. Daniil said, "Partner Elijah, I was listening carefully to the conversation between yourself and Dr. Vasilia. I do not wish to comment unfavorably on what Dr. Vasilia has said, but I must tell you that, in my observation, Dr. Fastolf is a kind and courteous human being. He has never, to my knowledge, been deliberately cruel, nor has he, as nearly as I can judge, sacrificed a human being's essential welfare to the needs of his curiosity." Baley looked at Daniil's face, which gave the impression somehow of intense sincerity. He said, "Could you say anything against Dr. Fastolf, even if he were in fact cruel and thoughtless?" "I could remain silent." "But would you?" "If, by telling a lie, I were to harm a truthful Dr. Vasilia by casting unjustified doubt on her truthfulness, and if, by remaining silent, I would harm Dr. Fastolf by lending further color to the true accusations against him, and if the two harms were, to my mind, roughly equal in intensity, then it would be necessary for me to remain silent. Harm through an active deed outweighs, in general, harm through passivity, all things being reasonably equal." Baley said, "Then even though the first law states a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm, the two halves of the law are not equal? A fault of commission, you say, is greater than one of omission?" "The words of the law are merely an approximate description of the constant variations in positron emotive force along the robotic brain paths, Partner Elijah. I do not know enough to describe the matter mathematically, but I know what my tendencies are." "And they are always to choose not doing over doing, if the harm is roughly equal in both directions?" "In general. And always to choose truth over non-truth, if the harm is roughly equal in both directions. In general, that is." "And in this case, since you speak to refute Dr. Vasilia, and thus do her harm, you can only do so because the first law is mitigated sufficiently by the fact that you are telling the truth?" "That is so, Partner Elijah." "Yet the fact is, You would say what you have said, even though it were a lie, provided Dr. Fastoff had instructed you with sufficient intensity to tell that lie when necessary and to refuse to admit that you had been so instructed. There was a pause, and then Daniil said, "That is so, partner Elijah." "It is a complicated mess, Daniil, but you still believe that Dr. Fastoff did not murder Jander Pannell?" "My experience with him is that he is truthful, partner Elijah, and that he would not do harm to friend Jander." "And yet Dr. Fastoff has himself described a powerful motive for his having committed the deed, while Dr. Vasilia has described a completely different motive, one that is just as powerful and is even more disgraceful than the first." Baley brooded a bit. If the public were made aware of either motive, belief in Dr. Fastoff's guilt would be universal. Baley turned suddenly to Giscard. "How about you, Giscard? You have known Dr. Fastoff longer than Daniil has. Do you agree that Dr. Fastoff could not have committed the deed and could not have destroyed Jander on the basis of your understanding of Dr. Fastoff's character?" "I do, sir." Baley regarded the robot uncertainly. He was less advanced than Daniil. How far could he be trusted as a corroborating witness? Might he not be impelled to follow Daniil in whatever direction Daniil chose to take? He said, "You knew Dr. Vasilia, too, did you not?" "I knew her very well," said Giscard. "And liked her, I gather?" "She was in my charge for many years, and the task did not in any way trouble me." "Even though she fiddled with your programming?" "She was very skillful." "Would she lie about her father, about Dr. Fastoff, that is?" Giscard hesitated. "No, sir, she would not." "Then you are saying that what she says is the truth?" "Not quite, sir. What I am saying is that she herself believes she is telling the truth." "But why should she believe such evil things about her father to be true, if in actual fact he is as kind a person as Daniil has just told me he was?" Giscard said slowly, "She has been embittered by various events in her youth, events for which she considers Dr. Fastoff to have been responsible, and for which he may indeed have been unwittingly responsible to an extent. It seems to me it was not his intention that the events in question should have the consequences they did. However, human beings are not governed by the straightforward laws of robotics. It is therefore difficult to judge the complexities of their motivations under most conditions." "True enough," muttered Baley. Giscard said, "Do you think the task of demonstrating Dr. Fastoff's innocence to be hopeless?" Baley's eyebrows moved toward each other in a frown. "It may be. As it happens, I see no way out. And if Dr. Vasilia talks, as she has threatened to do—" "But you ordered her not to talk. You explained that it would be dangerous to herself if she did." Baley shook his head. "I was bluffing. I didn't know what else to say." "Do you intend to give up, then?" And Baley said forcefully, "No. If it were merely Fastoff, I might. After all, what physical harm would come to him? Roboticide is not even a crime, apparently, merely a civil offense. At worst, he will lose political influence and perhaps find himself unable to continue with his scientific labors for a time. I would be sorry to see that happen, but if there's nothing more I can do, then there's nothing more I can do. And if it were just myself, I might give up, too. Failure would damage my reputation, but who can build a brick house without bricks? I would go back to Earth a bit tarnished. I would lead a miserable and unclassified life. But that is the chance that faces every Earth man and woman. Better men than I have had to face that as unjustly. However, it is a matter of Earth. If I fail, then along with the grievous loss to Dr. Fastoff and to myself, there would be an end for any hope Earth people might have to move out of Earth and into the galaxy generally. For that reason, I must not fail, and I must keep on somehow, as long as I am not physically thrust off this world." Having ended in what was almost a whisper, he suddenly looked up and said in a peevish tone, "Why are we sitting here parked, Giscard? Are you running the motor for your own amusement?" "With respect, sir," said Giscard, "you have not told me where to take you." "True. I beg your pardon, Giscard. First, take me to the nearest of the community personals that Dr. Vasilia made mention of. You, too, may be immune to such things, but I have a bladder that needs emptying. After that, find someplace nearby where I can get something to eat. I have a stomach that needs filling. And after that...
Yes, partner Elijah? Asked Daniil.
To tell you the truth, Daniil, I don't know. However, after I attend to these purely physical needs, I will think of something. And how Baley wished he could believe that.
45. The airfoil did not skim the ground for long. It came to a halt, swaying a bit, and Baley felt the usual odd tightening of his stomach. That small unsteadiness told him he was in a vehicle, and it drove away the temporary feeling of being safe within walls and between robots. Through the glass ahead and on either side, and backward if he craned his neck, was the whiteness of sky and the greenness of foliage, all amounting to outside. That is, to nothing. He swallowed uneasily. They had stopped at a small structure. Baley said, "Is this the community personnel?"
Daniil said, "It is the nearest of a number on the Institute grounds, partner Elijah." "You found it quickly. Are these structures also included in the map that has been pumped into your memory?"
"That is the case, partner Elijah."
"Is this one in use now?"
"It may be, partner Elijah, but 3 or 4 may use it simultaneously."
"Is there room for me?"
"Very likely, partner Elijah."
"Well, then, let me out. I'll go there and see."
The robots did not move. Giscard said, "Sir, we may not enter with you."
"Yes, I'm aware of that, Giscard."
"We will not be able to guard you properly, sir." Baley frowned. The lesser robot would naturally have the more rigid mind, and Baley suddenly recognized the danger that he would simply not be allowed out of their sight, and therefore not allowed to enter the personal. He put a note of urgency into his voice and turned his attention to Daniil, who might be expected to more nearly understand human needs. "I can't help that, Giscard. Daniil, I have no choice in the matter. Let me out of the car." Giscard looked at Baley without moving, and for one horrid moment Baley thought the robot would suggest that he unburden himself in the nearby field, in the open, like an animal. The moment passed. Daniil said, "I think we must allow partner Elijah to have his way in this respect." Whereupon Giscard said to Baley, "If you can wait for a short while, sir, I will approach the structure first." Baley grimaced. Giscard walked slowly toward the building and then, deliberately, circumnavigated it. Baley might have predicted the fact that once Giscard disappeared, his own sense of urgency would increase. He tried to distract his own nerve endings by staring around at the prospect. After some study, he became aware of thin wires in the air, here and there, fine dark hairs against the white sky. He did not see them to begin with. What he saw first was an oval object sliding along beneath the clouds. He became aware of it as a vehicle, and realized that it was not floating, but was suspended from a long horizontal wire. He followed that long wire with his eyes, forward and back, noting others of the sort. He then saw another vehicle farther off, and yet another still farther off. The farthest of the 3 was a featureless speck, whose nature he understood only because he had seen the nearer ones. Undoubtedly, these were cable cars for internal transportation from one part of the Robotics Institute to another. How spread out it all was, thought Baley. How needlessly the Institute consumed space. And yet, in doing so, it did not consume the surface. The structures were sufficiently widely spaced so that the greenery seemed untouched, and the plant and animal life continued, Baley imagined, as they might in emptiness. Solaria, Baley remembered, had been empty. No doubt all the spacer worlds were empty, since Aurora, the most populous, was so empty even here in the most built-up region of the planet. For that matter, even Earth, outside the cities, was empty. But there were the cities, and Baley felt a sharp pang of homesickness, which he had to push to one side. Daniil said, Friend Giscard has completed his examination." Giscard was back, and Baley said tartly, "Well, will you be so kind as to grant me permission?" He stopped. Why expend sarcasm on the impenetrable hide of a robot? Giscard said, "It seems quite certain that the personal is unoccupied." "Good. Then get out of my way." Baley flung open the door of the airfoil and stepped out onto the gravel of a narrow path. He strode rapidly, with Daniil following. When he reached the door of the structure, Daniil wordlessly indicated the contact that would open it. Daniil did not venture to touch the contact himself. Presumably, thought Baley, to have done so without specific instructions would have indicated an intention to enter, and even the intention was not permitted. Baley pushed the contact and entered, leaving the 2 robots behind. It was not until he was inside that it occurred to him that Giscard could not possibly have entered the personal to see that it was unoccupied, that the robot must have been judging the matter from external appearance.
a dubious proceeding at best. And Baley realized with some discomfort that for the first time he was isolated and separated from all protectors, and that the protectors on the other side of the door couldn't easily enter if he were suddenly in trouble. What then if he were at this moment not alone? What if some enemy had been alerted by Vasilia, who knew he would be in search of a personal? And what if that enemy was in hiding right now in the structure? Baley grew suddenly and uncomfortably aware that, as would not have been the case on Earth, he was totally unarmed. 46. To be sure, the structure was not large. There were small urinals side by side, half a dozen of them. Small wash basins side by side, again half a dozen. No showers, no clothes fresheners, no shaving devices. There were half a dozen stalls, separated by partitions and with small doors to each. Might there not be someone waiting inside one of them? The doors did not come down to the ground. Moving softly, he bent and glanced under each door, looking for any sign of legs. He then approached each door, testing it, swinging it open tensely, ready to slam it shut at the least sign of anything untoward, and then to dash to the door that led to the outside. All the stalls were empty. He looked around to make sure there were no other hiding places. He could find none. He went to the door to the outside and found no indication of a way of locking it. It occurred to him that there would naturally be no way of locking it. The personal was clearly for the use of several men at the same time. Others would have to be able to enter at need. Yet he could not very well leave and try another, for the danger would exist at any. And besides, he could delay no longer. For a moment he found himself unable to decide which of the series of urinals he should use. He could approach and use any of them. So could anyone else. He forced the choice of one upon himself, and, aware of openness all around, was afflicted at once with bashful bladder. He felt the urgency, but had to wait impatiently for the feeling of apprehension at the possible entrance of others to dissipate itself. He no longer feared the entrance of enemies, just the entrance of anyone. And then he thought, the robots will at least delay anyone approaching. With that, he managed to relax. He was quite done, greatly relieved, and about to turn to a wash basin, when he heard a moderately high-pitched, rather tense voice. "Are you Elijah Baley?" Baley froze. After all his apprehension and all his precautions, he had been unaware of someone entering. In the end, he had been entirely wrapped up in the simple act of emptying his bladder, something that should not have taken up even the tiniest fraction of his conscious mind. Was he getting old? To be sure, there seemed no threat of any kind in the voice he heard. It seemed empty of menace. It may have been that Baley simply felt certain, and had the sure confidence within him, that Daniil, at least, if not Giscard, would not have allowed a threat to enter. What had bothered Baley was merely the entrance. In his whole life he had never been approached, let alone addressed, by a man in a personal. On Earth that was the most strenuous taboo, and on Solaria, and until now on Aurora, he had used only one-person personals. The voice came again, impatient. "Come, you must be Elijah Baley." Slowly, Baley turned. It was a man of moderate height, delicately dressed in well-fitted clothing in various shades of blue. He was light-skinned, light-haired, and had a small mustache that was a shade darker than the hair on his head. Baley found himself staring with fascination at the small strip of hair on the upper lip. It was the first time he had seen a spacer with a mustache. Baley said, and was filled with shame at speaking in a personal, "I am Elijah Baley." His voice, even in his own ears, seemed a scratchy and unconvincing whisper. The spacer seemed to find it unconvincing, certainly, he said, narrowing his eyes and staring. "The robots outside said Elijah Baley was in here, but you don't look at all the way you looked on Hyperwave, not at all." That foolish dramatization, thought Baley fiercely. No one would meet him to the end of time without having been preliminarily poisoned by that impossible representation. No one would accept him as a human being at the start, as a fallible human being. And when they discovered the fallibility, they would, in disappointment, consider him a fool. He turned resentfully to the wash basin and splashed water, then shook his hands vaguely in the air, while wondering where the hot air jet might be found. The spacer touched to contact and seemed to pluck a thin bit of absorbent fluff out of mid-air. "Thank you," said Baley, taking it. "That was not me in the Hyperwave show. It was an actor." "I know that, but they might have picked one that looked more like you, mightn't they?" It seemed to be a source of grievance to him. "I want to speak to you." "How did you get past my robots?" That was another source of grievance, apparently. "I nearly didn't," said the spacer. "They tried to stop me, and I only had one robot with me. I had to pretend I had to get in here on an emergency basis, and they searched me. They absolutely laid hands on me to see if I was carrying anything dangerous. I'd have you up on charges if you weren't an Earthman. You can't give robots the kind of orders that embarrass a human being." "I'm sorry," said Baley stiffly, "but I am not the one who gave them their orders. What can I do for you?"
"I want to speak to you."
"You are speaking to me. Who are you?" The other seemed to hesitate, then said,
"Grumionus."
"Santrix Grumionus?"
"That's right."
"Why do you want to speak to me?" For a moment, Grumionus stared at Baley, apparently with embarrassment. Then he mumbled, "Well, as long as I'm here, if you don't mind, I might as well." And he stepped toward the line of urinals. Baley realized, with the last refinement of horrified queasiness, what it was Grumionus intended to do. He turned hastily and said, "I'll wait for you outside."
No, don't go,"
said Grumionus desperately, in what was almost a squeak.
"This won't take a second, please."
It was only that Baley now wanted just as desperately to talk to Grumionus, and did not want to do anything that might offend the other and make him unwilling to talk. Otherwise he would not have been willing to accede to the request. He kept his back turned and squinted his eyes nearly shut, in a sort of horrified reflex. It was only when Grumionus came up around him, his hands kneading a fluffy towel of his own, that Baley could relax again after a fashion. "Why do you want to speak to me?" he said again.
"Gladia, the woman from Solaria—"
Grumionus looked dubious and stopped. "I know Gladia," said Baley coldly.
"Gladia viewed me trimensionally, you know, and told me you had asked about me. And she asked me if I had in any way mistreated a robot she owned, a human-looking robot like one of those outside."
"Well, did you, Mr. Grumionus?"
"No. I didn't even know she owned a robot like that until— Did you tell her I did?"
"I was only asking questions, Mr. Grumionus." Grumionus had made a fist of his right hand and was grinding it nervously into his left. He said intensely, "I don't want to be falsely accused of anything, and especially where such a false accusation would affect my relationship with Gladia." Baley said, "How did you find me?"
Grumionus said, "She asked me about that robot and said you had asked about me. I had heard you had been called to Aurora by Dr. Fastoff to solve this puzzle about the robot. It was on the hyperwave news, and—"
The words ground out as though they were emerging from him with the utmost difficulty. "Go on," said Baley.
"I had to talk to you and explain that I had had nothing to do with that robot. Nothing. Gladia didn't know where you were, but I thought Dr. Fastoff would know."
"So you called him?"
"Oh, no, I don't think I'd have the nerve to. He's such an important scientist. But Gladia called him for me. She's that kind of person. He told her you had gone to see his daughter, Dr. Vasilia Aliena. That was good, because I know her."
"Yes, I know you do," said Baley.
Grumionus looked uneasy. Did you ask her about me, too?"
His uneasiness seemed to be degenerating to misery.
"I finally called Dr. Vasilia, and she said you had just left and I'd probably find you at some community personal, and this one is the closest to her establishment. I was sure there would be no reason for you to delay in order to find a farther one. I mean, why should you?"
"You reason quite correctly. But how is it you got here so quickly?"
"I work at the Robotics Institute, and my establishment is on the Institute grounds. My scooter brought me here in minutes."
"Did you come here alone?"
"Yes, with only one robot. The scooter is a two-seater, you see."
"And your robot is waiting outside?"
"Yes."
"Tell me again why you want to see me."
"I've got to make sure you don't think I've had anything to do with that robot. I never even heard of him till this whole thing exploded in the news. So, can I talk to you now?"
"Yes, but not here," said Baley firmly. "Let's get out."
How strange it was, thought Baley, that he was so pleased to get out from behind walls and into the outside. There was something more totally alien to this personal than anything else he had encountered on either Aurora or Solaria. Even more disconcerting than the fact of planet-wide indiscriminate use had been the horror of being openly and casually addressed, of behavior that drew no distinction between this place and its purpose and any other place and purpose. The book films he had viewed had said nothing of this. Clearly, as Fastoff had pointed out,
they were not written for Earth people, but for Aurorans and to a lesser extent for possible tourists from the other 49 spacer worlds. Earth people, after all, almost never went to the spacer worlds, least of all to Aurora. They were not welcome there. Why, then, should they be addressed? And why should the book films expand on what everyone knew? Should they make a fuss over the fact that Aurora was spherical in shape, or that water was wet, or that one man might address another freely in a personal? Yet, did that not make a mockery of the very name of the structure? Yet Baley found himself unable to avoid thinking of the women's personals on Earth, where, as Jessie had frequently told him, women chattered incessantly and felt no discomfort about it. Why women, but not men? Baley had never thought seriously about it before, but had accepted it merely as custom, as unbreakable custom. But if women, why not men? It didn't matter. The thought only affected his intellect, and not whatever it was about his mind that made him feel overwhelming and ineradicable distaste for the whole idea. He repeated, "Let's get out." Gramianus protested. "But your robots are out there." "So they are. What of it?" "But this is something I want to talk about privately, man to man." He stumbled over the phrase. "I suppose you mean spacer to Earth man." "If you like." "My robots are necessary. They are my partners in my investigation." "But this has nothing to do with the investigation. That's what I'm trying to tell you." "I'll be the judge of that," said Baley firmly, walking out of the personal. Gramianus hesitated, and then followed. 47. Daniil and Giscard were waiting, impassive, expressionless, patient. On Daniil's face, Baley thought he could make out a trace of concern, but on the other hand, he might merely be reading that emotion into those inhumanly human features. Giscard, the less human-looking, showed nothing, of course, even to the most willing personifier. A third robot waited as well, presumably that of Gramianus. He was simpler in appearance even than Giscard, and had an air of shabbiness about him. It was clear that Gramianus was not very well-to-do. Daniil said, with what Baley automatically assumed to be the warmth of relief, "I am pleased that you are well, partner Elijah." "Entirely well. I am curious, however, about something. If you had heard me call out in alarm from within, would you have come in?" "At once, sir," said Giscard. "Even though you are programmed not to enter personals?" "The need to protect a human being, you in particular, would be paramount, sir." "That is so, partner Elijah," said Daniil. "I'm glad to hear that," said Baley. "This person is Santarix Gramianus. Mr. Gramianus, this is Daniil, and this is Giscard." Each robot bent his head solemnly. Gramianus merely glanced at them and lifted one hand in indifferent acknowledgment. He made no effort to introduce his own robot. Baley looked around. The light was distinctly dimmer. The wind was brisker. The air was cooler. The sun was completely hidden by clouds. There was a gloom to the surroundings that did not seem to affect Baley, who continued to be delighted at having escaped from the personal. It lifted his spirits amazingly that he was actually experiencing the feeling of being pleased at being outside. It was a special case, he knew, but it was a beginning, and he could not help but consider it a triumph. Baley was about to turn to Gramianus to resume the conversation when his eye caught movement. Walking across the lawn came a woman with an accompanying robot. She was coming toward them, but seemed totally oblivious to them. She was clearly making for the personal. Baley put out his arm in the direction of the woman, as though to stop her, even though she was still 30 meters away, and muttered, "Doesn't she know that's a men's personal?" "What?" said Gramianus. The woman continued to approach, while Baley watched in total puzzlement. Finally, the woman's robot stepped to one side to wait, and the woman entered the structure. Baley said helplessly, "But she can't go in there." Gramianus said, "Why not? It's communal." "But it's for men." "It's for people," said Gramianus. He seemed utterly confused. "Either sex? Surely you can't mean that." "Any human being. Of course I mean it. How would you want it to be? I don't understand." Baley turned away. It had not been many minutes before that he had thought that open conversation in a personal was the acme in bad taste of things not done. If he had tried to think of something worse yet, he would have completely failed to dredge up the possibility of encountering a woman in a personal. Convention on Earth required him to ignore the presence of others in the large community personals on that world, but not all the conventions ever invented would have prevented him from knowing whether a person passing him was a man or a woman. What if, while he had been in the personal, a woman had entered, casually, indifferently, as this one had just done? Or worse still, What if he had entered a personal and found a woman already there? He could not estimate his reaction. He had never weighed the possibility, let alone met with such a situation. But he found the thought totally intolerable, and the book films had told him nothing about that either. He had viewed those films in order that he might not approach the investigation in total ignorance of the Auroran way of life, and they had left him in total ignorance of all that was important. Then how could he handle this triply knotted puzzle of Jander's death, when at every step he found himself lost in ignorance? A moment before he had felt triumph at a small conquest over the terrors of outside, but now he was faced with the feeling of being ignorant of everything, ignorant even of the nature of his ignorance. It was now, while fighting not to picture the woman passing through the airspace lately occupied by himself, that he came near to utter despair. 48. Again Giscard said, and in a way that made it possible to read concern into his words, if not into the tone, "Are you unwell, sir? Do you need help?" Baley muttered, No, I'm all right. But let's move away. We're in the path of people wishing to use that structure." He walked rapidly toward the airfoil that was resting in the open stretch beyond the gravel path. On the other side was a small two-wheeled vehicle with two seats, one behind the other. Baley assumed it to be Gramianus's scooter. His feeling of depression and misery, Baley realized, was accentuated by the fact that he felt hungry. It was clearly past lunchtime, and he had not eaten. He turned to Gramianus. "Let's talk, but if you don't mind, let's do it over lunch. That is, if you haven't already eaten, and if you don't mind eating with me." "Where are you going to eat?" "I don't know. Where does one eat at the Institute?" Gramianus said, "Not at the community diner. We can't talk there." "Is there an alternative?" "Come to my establishment," said Gramianus at once. "It isn't one of the fancier ones here. I'm not one of your high executives. Still, I have a few serviceable robots, and we can set a decent table. I tell you what, I'll get on my scooter with Brundage, my robot, you know, and you follow me. You'll have to go slowly, but I'm only a little over a kilometer away. It will just take 2 or 3 minutes." He moved away at an eager half-run. Baley watched him and thought there seemed to be a kind of gangly youthfulness about him. There was no easy way of actually judging his age, of course. Spacers didn't show age, and Gramianus might easily be 50, but he acted young, almost what an Earthman would consider teenage young. Baley wasn't sure exactly what there was about him that gave that impression. Baley turned suddenly to Daniil. "Do you know Gramianus, Daniil?" "I have never met him before, partner Elijah." "You, Giscard?" "I have met him once, sir, but only in passing." "Do you know anything about him, Giscard?" "Nothing that is not apparent on the surface, sir." "His age, his personality?" "No, sir." Gramianus shouted, "Ready!" His scooter was humming rather roughly. It was clear that it was not airjet assisted. The wheels would not leave the ground. Brundage sat behind Gramianus. Giscard, Daniil, and Baley moved quickly into their airfoil once again. Gramianus moved outward in a loose circle. Gramianus's hair flew backward in the wind, and Baley had a sudden sensation of how the wind must feel when one traveled in an open vehicle such as a scooter. He was thankful he was totally enclosed in an airfoil, which suddenly seemed to him a much more civilized way of traveling. The scooter straightened out and darted off with a muted roar, Gramianus waving one hand in a follow-me gesture. The robot behind him maintained his balance with almost negligent ease, and did not hold on to Gramianus's waist, as Baley was certain a human being would have needed to. The airfoil followed. Although the scooter's smooth forward progression seemed high speed, that was apparently the illusion of its small size. The airfoil had some difficulty maintaining a speed low enough to avoid running it down. "Just the same," said Baley thoughtfully, "one thing puzzles me." "What is that, partner Elijah?" asked Daniil. "Vasilia referred to this Gramianus disparagingly as a barber. Apparently he deals with hair, clothes, and other matters of personal human adornment. How is it, then, that he has an establishment on the grounds of the Robotics Institute?" Chapter 12. Again Gramianus. 49. It took only a few minutes before Baley found himself in the 4th Auroran establishment he had seen since his arrival on the planet a day and a half before. Fastoff's, Gladia's, Vasilia's, and now Gramianus's. Gramianus's establishment appeared smaller and drabber than the others, even though it showed to Baley's unpracticed eye in Auroran matters signs of recent construction. The distinctive mark of the Auroran establishment, the robotic niches, were, however, present. On entering, Giscard and Daniil moved quickly into 2 that were empty, and faced the room, unmoving and silent. Gramianus's robot, Brundage, moved into a third niche almost as quickly. There was no sign of any difficulty in making their choices, or of any tendency for any one niche to be the target of two robots, however briefly. Baley wondered how the robots avoided conflict, and decided there must be signal communication among them of a kind that was subliminal to human beings. It was something, provided he remembered to do so, concerning which he might consult Daniil. Gramianus was studying the niches also, Baley noticed. Gramianus's hand had gone to his upper lip, and for a moment his forefinger stroked the small mustache. He said a bit uncertainly, "Your robot, the human-looking one, doesn't seem right in the niche. That's Daniil Olivau, isn't it? Dr. Fastolf's robot?" "Yes," said Baley. He was in the hyperwave drama, too, or at least an actor was, one who better fit the part.
"Yes, I remember."
Baley noted that Gramianus, like Vasilia, and even like Gladia and Fastolf, kept a certain distance. There seemed to be a repulsion field, unseen, unfelt, unsensed in any way, around Baley, that kept these spacers from approaching too closely, that sent them into a gentle curve of avoidance when they passed him. Baley wondered if Gramianus was aware of this, or if it was entirely automatic. And what did they do with the chairs he sat in while in their establishments, the dishes he ate from, the towels he used? Would ordinary washing suffice? Were there special sterilizing procedures? Would they discard and replace everything? Would the establishments be fumigated once he left the planet, or every night? What about the community personnel he used? Would they tear it down and rebuild it? What about the woman who had ignorantly entered it after he had left? Or could she possibly have been the fumigator? He realized he was getting silly. To outer space with it. What the Aurorans did and how they dealt with their problems was their affair, and he would bother his head no more with them. Jehoshaphat. He had his own problems, and right now the particular splinter of it was Gramianus, and he would tackle that after lunch. Lunch was rather simple, largely vegetarian, but for the first time he had a little trouble. Each separate item was too sharply defined in taste. The carrots tasted rather strongly of carrots, and the peas of peas, so to speak. A little too much so, perhaps. He ate rather reluctantly and tried not to show a slightly rising gorge. And as he did so, he became aware that he grew used to it, as though his taste buds saturated and could handle the excess more easily. It dawned on Baley in a rather sad way that if his exposure to Auroran food was to continue for any length of time, he would return to Earth missing that distinctiveness of flavor and resenting the flowing together of Earth tastes. Even the crispness of various items, which had startled him at first, as each closing of his teeth seemed to create a noise that surely, he thought, must interfere with conversation, had already grown to seem exciting evidence that he was, in fact, eating. There would be a silence about an Earth meal that would leave him missing something. He began to eat with attention, to study the tastes. Perhaps when Earth people established themselves on other worlds, this spacer-fashion food would be the mark of the new diet, especially if there were no robots to prepare and serve the meals. And then he thought uncomfortably, not when, but if Earth people established themselves on other worlds, and the ifness of it all depended on him, on plainclothesman Elijah Baley. The burden of it weighed him down. The meal was over. A pair of robots brought in the heated, moistened napkins with which one could clean one's hands, except that they weren't ordinary napkins. For when Baley put his down on the plate, it seemed to move slightly, thin out, and grow cobwebby. Then, quite suddenly, it leaped up insubstantially and was carried into an outlet in the ceiling. Baley jumped slightly, and his eyes moved upward, following the disappearing item open-mouthed. Gramianus said, "That's something new I just picked up. Disposable, you see, but I don't know if I like it yet. Some people say it will clog the disposal vent after a while, and others worry about pollution because they say some of it will surely get into your lungs. The manufacturer says not, but—" Baley realized suddenly that he had said not a word during the meal, and that this was the first time either of them had spoken since the short exchange on Daniil before the meal had been served. And there was no use in small talk about napkins. Baley said rather gruffly, "Are you a barber, Mr. Gramianus?" Gramianus flushed, his light skin reddening to the hairline. He said in a choked voice, "Who told you that?" Baley said, "If that is an impolite way of referring to your profession, I apologize. It is a common way of speaking on Earth, and is no insult there." Gramianus said, "I'm a hair designer and a clothing designer. It is a recognized branch of art. I am, in fact, a personnel artist." His finger went to his mustache again. Baley said gravely, "I notice your mustache. Is it common to grow them on Aurora?" "No, it is not. I hope it will become so. You take your masculine face—" A great many of them can be strengthened and improved by the artful design of facial hair. Everything is in the design. That's part of my profession. You can go too far, of course. In the world of Pallas, facial hair is common, but it is the practice there to indulge in particolored dyeing. Each individual hair is separately dyed to produce some sort of mixture. Now, that's foolish. It doesn't last, the colors change with time, and it looks terrible. But even so, it's better than facial baldness in some ways. Nothing is less attractive than a facial desert. That's my own phrase. I use it in my personal talks with potential clients, and it's very effective. Females can get by with no facial hair because they make up for it in other ways. On the world of Smithius, there was a hypnotic quality to his quiet, rapid words and his earnest expression, the way in which his eyes widened and remained fixed on Baley with an intense sincerity. Baley had to shake loose with an almost physical force. He said, "Are you a roboticist, Mr. Gramianus?" Gramianus looked startled and a little confused at being interrupted in mid-flow. "A roboticist?" "Yes, a roboticist." "No, not at all. I use robots as everyone does, but I don't know what's inside them. Don't care, really." "But you live here on the grounds of the Robotics Institute. How is that?" "Why shouldn't I?" Gramianus's voice was measurably more hostile. "If you're not a roboticist..." Gramianus grimaced. "That's stupid. The Institute, when it was designed some years ago, was intended to be a self-contained community. We have our own transport vehicle repair shops, our own personal robot maintenance shops, our own physicians, our own structuralists. Our personnel live here. And if they have use for a personnel artist, that's Santirix Gramianus, and I live here too. Is there something wrong with my profession that I should not?" "I haven't said that." Gramianus turned away with a residual petulance that Baley's hasty disclaimer had not allayed. He pressed a button, then, after studying a varicolored rectangular strip, did something that was remarkably like drumming his fingers briefly. A sphere dropped gently from the ceiling and remained suspended a meter or so above their heads. It opened as though it were an orange that was unsegmenting, and a play of colors began within it, together with a soft wash of sound. The two melted together so skillfully that Baley, watching with astonishment, discovered that after a short while it was hard to distinguish one from the other. The windows opacified, and the segments grew brighter. "Too bright?" asked Gramianus. "No," said Baley after some hesitation. "It's meant for background, and I've picked a soothing combination that will make it easier for us to talk in a civilized way, you know." Then he said briskly, "Shall we get to the point?" Baley withdrew his attention from the whatever it was. Gramianus had not given it a name, with some difficulty, and said, "If you please, I would like to." "Have you been accusing me of having anything to do with the immobilization of that robot Jander?" "I've been inquiring into the circumstances of the robot's ending." "But you've mentioned me in connection with that ending. In fact, just a little while ago, you asked me if I were a roboticist. I know what you had in mind. You were trying to get me to admit I knew something about robotics, so that you could build up a case against me as the ender of the robot. You might say the killer." "The killer? You can't kill a robot. In any case, I didn't end it or kill it or anything you want to call it. I told you I'm not a roboticist. I know nothing about robotics. How can you even think that—" "I must investigate all connections, Mr. Gramianus. Jander belonged to Gladia, the Solarian woman, and you were friendly with her. That's a connection." "There could be any number of people friendly with her. That's no connection." "Are you willing to state that you never saw Jander in all the times you may have been in Gladia's establishment?" "Never, not once." "You never knew she had a humaniform robot?" "No." "She never mentioned him?" "She had robots all over the place, all ordinary robots. She said nothing about having anything else." Baley shrugged. "Very well. I have no reason, so far, to suppose that that is not the truth." "Then say so to Gladia. That is why I wanted to see you. To ask you to do that, to insist." "Has Gladia any reason to think otherwise?" "Of course. You poisoned her mind. You questioned her about me in that connection, and she assumed she was made uncertain. The fact is, she called this morning and asked me if I had anything to do with it. I told you that." "And you denied it?" "Of course I denied it, and very strenuously, too, because I didn't have anything to do with it. But it's not convincing if I do the denying. I want you to do it. I want you to tell her that, in your opinion, I had nothing to do with the whole business. You just said I didn't, and you can't, without any evidence at all, destroy my reputation. I can report you." "To whom?" "To the Committee on Personal Defense, to the legislature. The head of this institute is a close personal friend of the chairman himself, and I've already sent a full report to him on this matter.
I'm not waiting, you understand. I'm taking action."
Gromynes shook his head with an attitude that might have been intended for fierceness, but that did not entirely carry conviction, considering the mildness of his face.
"Look," he said, "this isn't Earth. We are protected here. Your planet, with its overpopulation, makes your people exist in so many beehives, so many anthills. You push against each other, suffocate each other. And it doesn't matter. 1 life or 1,000,000 lives. It doesn't matter."
Baley, fighting to keep contempt from showing in his voice, said, "You've been reading historical novels."
"Of course I have, and they describe it as it is. You can't have billions of people on a single world without its being so. On Aurora, we are each a valuable life. We are protected physically, each of us, by our robots, so that there is never an assault, let alone murder, on Aurora."
"Except for gender."
"That's not murder. It's only a robot. And we are protected from the kinds of harm more subtle than assault by our legislature. The Committee on Personal Defense takes a dim view, a very dim view, of any action that unfairly damages the reputation or the social status of any individual citizen. And Auroran, acting as you did, would be in trouble enough. As for an Earthman, well—"
Baley said, "I am carrying on an investigation at the invitation, I presume, of the legislature. I don't suppose Dr. Fastoff could have brought me here without legislative permission."
"Maybe so, but that wouldn't give you the right to overstep the limits of fair investigation."
"Are you going to put this up to the legislature, then?"
"I'm going to have the Institute head—"
"What is his name, by the way?"
"Keldon Amadiro. I'm going to ask him to put it up to the legislature, and he's in the legislature, you know. He's one of the leaders of the Globalist Party, so I think you had better make it plain to Gladia that I am completely innocent."
"I would like to, Mr. Gromynes, because I suspect that you are innocent. But how can I change suspicion to certainty unless you will allow me to ask you some questions?"
Gromynes hesitated. Then, with an air of defiance, he leaned back in his chair and placed his hands behind his neck, the picture of a man utterly failing to appear at ease. He said, "Ask away. I have nothing to hide, and after you're done, you'll have to call Gladia right on that trimensional transmitter behind you and say your piece, or you will be in more trouble than you can imagine."
"I understand. But first, how long have you known Dr. Vasilia Fastoff, Mr. Gromynes, or Dr. Vasilia Aliena, if you know her by that name?"
Gromynes hesitated, then said in a tense voice, "Why do you ask that? What does that have to do with it?"
Baley sighed, and his dour face seemed to sadden further. "I remind you, Mr. Gromynes, that you have nothing to hide, and that you want to convince me of your innocence, so that I can convince Gladia of the same. Just tell me how long you have known her. If you have not known her, just say so. But before you do, it is only fair to tell you that Dr. Vasilia has stated that you knew her well enough at least to offer yourself to her."
Gromynes looked chagrined. He said in a shaky voice, "I don't know why people have to make a big thing out of it. An offer is a perfectly natural social interaction that concerns no one else. Of course, you're an Earthman, so you'd make a fuss about it."
"I understand she didn't accept your offer."
Gromynes brought his hands down upon his lap, fists clenched. "Accepting or rejecting is entirely up to her. There have been people who've offered themselves to me and whom I've rejected. It's no large matter."
"Well, then, how long have you known her?"
"For some years. About 15.
"Did you know her when she was still living with Dr. Fastoff?"
"I was just a boy then," he said, flushing.
"How did you get to know her?"
"When I finished my training as a personnel artist, I was called in to design a wardrobe for her. It gave her pleasure, and after that she used my services, in that respect, exclusively."
"Was it on her recommendation, then, that you received your present position as, might we say, official personnel artist for the members of the Robotics Institute?"
"She recognized my qualifications. I was tested along with others and won the position on my merits."
"But she did recommend you?"
Briefly and with annoyance, Gromynes said, "Yes."
"And you felt the only decent return you could make was to offer yourself to her?"
Gromynes grimaced and drew his tongue across his lips as though tasting something unpleasant. "That is disgusting. I suppose an Earthman would think in such a way. My offer meant only that it pleased me to do so."
"Because she is attractive and has a warm personality?"
Gromynes hesitated. "Well, I wouldn't say she has a warm personality," he said cautiously, "but certainly she's attractive."
"I've been told that you offer yourself to everybody without distinction."
"That is a lie."
"What is a lie? That you offer yourself to everybody, or that I have been told so?"
That I offer myself to everybody. Who said that?
I don't know that it would serve any purpose to answer that question. Would you expect me to quote you as a source of embarrassing information? Would you speak freely to me if you thought I would?
Well, whoever said it was a liar.
Perhaps it was merely dramatic exaggeration. Had you offered yourself to others before you offered yourself to Dr. Vasilia?
Gramianus looked away. Once or twice, never seriously.
But Dr. Vasilia was someone you were serious about?
Well,
it is my understanding you offered yourself to her repeatedly, which is quite against Auroran custom.
Oh, Auroran custom,
Gramianus began furiously. Then he pressed his lips together firmly and his forehead furrowed.
See here, Mr. Baley. Can I speak to you confidentially?
Yes, all my questions are intended to satisfy myself that you had nothing to do with Jander's death. Once I am satisfied of that, you may be sure I'll keep your remarks in confidence.
Very well, then. It's nothing wrong. It's nothing I'm ashamed of, you understand. It's just that I have a strong sense of privacy. And I have a right to that if I wish, don't I?
Absolutely, said Baley consolingly.
You see, I feel that social sex is best when there is a profound love and affection between partners.
I imagine that's very true.
And then there's no need for others, wouldn't you say?
It sounds plausible.
I've always dreamed of finding the perfect partner and never seeking anyone else. They call it monogamy. It doesn't exist on Aurora, but on some worlds it does. And they have it on Earth, don't they, Mr. Baley?
In theory, Mr. Gramianus.
It's what I want. I've looked for it for years. When I experimented with sex, sometimes I could tell something was missing. Then I met Dr. Vasilia, and she told me, well, people get confidential with their personnel artists because it's very personal work. And this is the really confidential part.
Well, go on.
Gramianus licked his lips. If what I say now gets out, I'm ruined. She'll do her best to see to it that I get no further commissions. Are you sure this has something to do with the case?
I assure you with as much force as I can, Mr. Gramianus, that this can be totally important.
Well, then, Gramianus did not look quite convinced. The fact is that I gathered from what Dr. Vasilia told me in bits and pieces that she is... His voice dropped to a whisper. A virgin.
I see, said Baley quietly, remembering Vasilia's certainty that her father's refusal had distorted her life and getting a firmer understanding of her hatred of her father.
That excited me. It seemed to me I could have her all to myself, and I would be the only one that she would ever have. I can't explain how much that meant to me. It made her look gloriously beautiful in my eyes, and I just wanted her so much.
So you offered yourself to her?
Yes.
Repeatedly. You weren't discouraged by her refusals?
It just reinforced her virginity, so to speak, and made me more eager. It was more exciting that it wasn't easy. I can't explain, and I don't expect you to understand.
Actually, Mr. Gramianus, I do understand. But there came a time when you stopped offering yourself to Dr. Vasilia?
Well, yes.
And began offering yourself to Gladia?
Well, yes.
Repeatedly?
Well, yes.
Why? Why the change?
Gramianus said, Dr. Vasilia finally made it clear that there was no chance, and then Gladia came along, and she looked like Dr. Vasilia, and that was it.
Baley said, But Gladia is no virgin. She was married on Solaria, and she experimented rather widely on Aurora, I am told.
I knew about that, but she stopped. You see, she's a Solarian by birth, not an Auroran, and she didn't quite understand Auroran customs, but she stopped because she doesn't like what she calls promiscuity.
Did she tell you that?
Yes. Monogamy is the custom on Solaria. She wasn't happily married, but it is still the custom she's used to, so she never enjoyed the Auroran way when she tried it, and monogamy is what I want, too, do you see?
I see. But how did you meet her in the first place?
I just met her. She was on the hyperwave when she arrived in Aurora, a romantic refugee from Solaria, and she played a part in that hyperwave drama.
Yes, but there was something else, wasn't there?
I don't know what else you want.
Well, let me guess. Didn't there come a point when Dr. Vasilia said she was rejecting you forever, and didn't she suggest an alternative to you?
Gramianus, in sudden fury, shouted, Did Dr. Vasilia tell you that?
Not in so many words, but I think I know what happened even so. Did she not tell you that it might be advantageous if you looked up a new arrival on the planet, a young lady from Solaria who was a ward or protege of Dr. Fastoff, who you know is Dr. Vasilia's father? Did Dr. Vasilia perhaps not tell you that people thought this young lady, Gladia, rather resembled herself, but that she was younger and had a warmer personality? Did Dr. Vasilia not, in short, encourage you to transfer your attentions from herself to Gladia? Gramianus was visibly suffering. His eyes flicked to those of Baley and away again. It was the first time that Baley saw in the eyes of any spacer a look of fright, or was it awe? Baley shook his head slightly. He must not take too much satisfaction at having overawed a spacer. It could damage his objectivity. He said, "Well, am I right or wrong?" And Gramianus said in a low voice, "That hyperwave show was no exaggeration, then. Do you read minds?" 50. Baley said calmly, "I just ask questions, and you haven't answered directly. Am I right or wrong?" Gramianus said, "It didn't quite happen like that. Not just like that. She did talk about Gladia, but—" He bit at his lower lip and then said, "Well, it amounted to what you said. It was just about the way you described it." "And you were not disappointed you found that Gladia did resemble Dr. Vasilia?" "In a way she did." Gramianus's eyes brightened. "But not really. Stand them side by side and you'll see the difference. Gladia has much greater delicacy and grace, a greater spirit of fun." "Have you offered yourself to Vasilia since you met Gladia?" "Are you mad? Of course not." "But you have offered yourself to Gladia?" "Yes." "And she rejected you?" "Well, yes, but you have to understand that she has to be sure, as I would have to be. Think what a mistake I would have made if I had moved Dr. Vasilia to accept me. Gladia doesn't want to make that mistake, and I don't blame her." "But you don't think it would be a mistake for her to accept you, so you have offered yourself again and again and again." Gramianus stared vacantly at Baley for a moment, and then seemed to shudder. He thrust out his lower lip as though he were a rebellious child. "You say it in an insulting way." "I'm sorry. I don't mean it to be insulting. Please answer the question." "Well, I have." "How many times have you offered yourself?" "I haven't counted. 4 times. Well, 5. Or maybe more." "And she has always rejected you?" "Yes, or I wouldn't have to offer again, would I?" "Does she reject you angrily?" "Oh, no, that's not Gladia. Very kindly." "Has it made you offer yourself to anyone else?" "What?" "Well, Gladia has rejected you. One way of responding would be to offer yourself to someone else. Why not, if Gladia doesn't want you?" "No, I don't want anyone else." "Why is that, do you suppose?" And strenuously, Gramianus said, "How should I know why that is? I want Gladia. It's a kind of madness, except that I think it's the best kind of insanity. I'd be mad not to have that kind of madness. I don't expect you to understand." "Have you tried to explain this to Gladia? She might understand." "Never. I'd distress her. I'd embarrass her. You don't talk about such things. I should see a mentologist." "Have you?" "No." "Why not?" Gramianus frowned. "You have a way of asking the rudest questions, Earthman." "Perhaps because I'm an Earthman. I know no better. But I'm also an investigator, and I must know these things. Why have you not seen a mentologist?" Surprisingly, Gramianus laughed. "I told you, the cure would be greater madness than the disease. I would rather be with Gladia and be rejected than be with anyone else and be accepted. Imagine having your mind out of whack and wanting it to stay out of whack. Any mentologist would put me in for major treatment." Baley thought a while, then said, "Do you know whether Dr. Vasilia is a mentologist in any way?" "She's a roboticist. They say that's the closest thing to it. If you know how a robot works, you've got a hint as to how a human brain works, or so they say." "Does it occur to you that Vasilia knows these strange feelings you have in connection with Gladia?" Gramianus stiffened. "I've never told her. I mean, in so many words." "Isn't it possible that she understands your feelings without having to ask? Is she aware that you have repeatedly offered yourself to Gladia?
Well, she would ask how I was getting along. In the way of long-standing acquaintanceship, you know. I would say certain things, nothing intimate.
Are you sure that it was never anything intimate? Surely she encouraged you to continue to offer.
You know, now that you mention it, I seem to see it all in a new way. I don't see quite how you managed to put it into my head. It's the questions you ask, I suppose, but it seems to me now that she did continue to encourage my friendship with Gladia. She actively supported it.
He looked very uneasy.
This never occurred to me before. I never really thought about it.
Why do you think she encouraged you to make repeated offers to Gladia?
Grumionus twitched his eyebrows ruefully, and his finger went to his mustache. I suppose some might guess she was trying to get rid of me, trying to make sure I wouldn't want to bother her. He made a small, laughing sound. That's not very complimentary to me, is it?
Did Dr. Vasilia cease being friendly with you?
Not at all. She was more friendly, if anything.
Did she try to tell you how to be more successful with Gladia, to show a greater interest in Gladia's work, for example?
She didn't have to do that. Gladia's work and mine are very similar. I work with human beings, and she with robots, but we're both designers, artists. That does make for closeness, you know. We even help each other at times. When I'm not offering and being rejected, we're good friends. That's a lot when you come to think of it.
Did Dr. Vasilia suggest you show a greater interest in Dr. Fastolf's work?
Why should she suggest that? I don't know anything about Dr. Fastolf's work.
Gladia might be interested in her benefactor's work, and it might be a way for you to ingratiate yourself with her.
Grumionus's eyes narrowed. He rose with almost explosive force, walked to the other end of the room, came back, stood in front of Baley, and said, "Now, you look here. I'm not the biggest brain on the planet, not even the second biggest, but I'm not a blithering idiot. I see what you're getting at, you know."
Oh?
All your questions have served to sort of wriggle me into saying that Dr. Vasilia got me to fall in love. That's it. He stopped in sudden surprise. I'm in love, like in the historical novels. He thought about that with the light of wonder in his eyes. Then the anger returned. That she got me to fall in love and to stay in love, so that I could find out things from Dr. Fastolf and learn how to immobilize that robot, Jander.
You don't think that's so?
No, it's not, shouted Grumionus. I don't know anything about robotics, anything. No matter how carefully anything about robotics were explained to me, I wouldn't understand it. And I don't think Gladia would either. Besides, I never asked anyone about robotics. I was never told by Dr. Fastolf or anyone anything about robotics. No one ever suggested I get involved with robotics. Dr. Vasilia never suggested it. Your whole rotten theory doesn't work. He shot his arms out to either side. It doesn't work, forget it. He sat back, folded his arms rigidly across his chest, and forced his lips together in a thin line, making a small mustache bristle. Baley looked up at the unsegmented orange, which was still humming its low, pleasantly varying tune, and displaying a gentle change of color as it swayed hypnotically through a small, slow arc. If Grumionus's outburst had upset his line of attack, he showed no sign of it. He said, "I understand what you're saying, but it's still true that you see much of Gladia, isn't it?" "Yes, I do." "Your repeated offers do not offend her, and her repeated rejections do not offend you?" Grumionus shrugged. "My offers are polite. Her refusals are gentle. Why should we be offended?" "But how do you spend time together? Sex is out, obviously, and you don't talk robotics. What do you do?" "Is that all there is to companionship, sex and robotics? We do a great deal together. We talk, for one thing. She is very curious about Aurora, and I spend hours describing the planet. She's seen very little of it, you know. And she spends hours telling me about Solaria and what a hellhole it is. I'd rather live on Earth, no offense intended. And there's her dead husband. What a miserable character he was. Gladia's had a hard life, poor woman. We go to concerts. I took her to the Art Institute a few times, and we work together. I told you that. We go over my designs, or her designs, together. To be perfectly honest, I don't see that working on robots is very rewarding, but we all have our own notions, you know. For that matter, she seemed to be amused when I explained why it was so important to cut hair correctly. Her own hair isn't quite right, you know. But mostly we go for walks." "Walks? Where?" "Nowhere particularly, just walks. That is her habit, because of the way she was brought up on Solaria. Have you ever been on Solaria? Yes, you have been, of course, I'm sorry. On Solaria, there are these huge estates with only 1 or 2 human beings on them, just robots otherwise. You can walk for miles and be completely alone, and Gladia says that it makes you feel as though you own the entire planet. The robots are always there, of course, keeping an eye on you and taking care of you, but of course they keep out of sight. Gladia misses that feeling of world ownership here on Aurora. Do you mean that she wants world ownership? You mean a kind of lust for power, Gladia? That's crazy. All she means is that she misses the feeling of being alone with nature. I don't see it myself, you understand, but I like humoring her. Of course, you can't quite get the Solarian feeling in Aurora. There are bound to be people about, especially in the EOS metropolitan area, and robots haven't been programmed to keep out of sight. In fact, Aurorans generally walk with robots. Still, I know some routes that are pleasant and not very crowded, and Gladia enjoys them. Do you enjoy them, too? Well, only because I would be with Gladia. Aurorans are walkers, too, by and large, but I must admit I am not. I had protesting muscles at first, and Vasilia laughed at me. She knew you went on walks, did she? Well, I came in limping one day and creaking at the thighs, so I had to explain. She laughed and said it was a good idea, and the best way to get a walker to accept an offer was to walk with them. Keep it up, she said, and she'll cancel her rejection before you get a chance to offer again. She'll make the offer herself. As it happened, Gladia didn't, but eventually I grew to like the walks very much, just the same. He seemed to have gotten over his flash of anger, and was now very much at his ease. He might have been thinking of the walks, Baley thought, for there was a half-smile on his face. He looked rather likable and vulnerable, with his mind back on who knew what conversational passage on a walk that had taken them who knew where. Baley almost smiled in response. Vasilia knew then that you continued the walks. I suppose so. I began to take Wednesdays and Saturdays off because that fit in with Gladia's schedule choice. And Vasilia would sometimes joke about my WS walks when I brought in some sketches. Did Dr. Vasilia ever join the walks? Certainly not. Baley shifted in his seat and stared intently at his fingertips as he said, I presume you had robots accompanying you on your walks. Absolutely. One of mine, one of hers. They kept rather out of the way, though. They didn't tag along in what Gladia called Aurora fashion. She wanted Solarian solitude, she said. So I obliged, though at first I got a crick in my neck looking around to see if Brundage was with me. And which robot accompanied Gladia? It wasn't always the same one. Whichever he was, he held off too. I didn't get to talk to him. What about Jander? Some of the sunniness left Gramianus's expression at once. What about him? He asked. Did he ever come along? If he did, you would know, wouldn't you? A humaniform robot? I certainly would, and he did not accompany us, not ever. Are you certain? Completely certain. Gramianus scowled. I imagine she thought him far too valuable to waste on duties any ordinary robot could perform. You seem annoyed. Did you think so, too? He was her robot. I didn't worry about it. And you never saw him when you were at Gladia's establishment? Never. Did she ever say anything about him, discuss him? Not that I recall. Didn't you consider that strange? Gramianus shook his head. No. Why talk about robots? Baley's somber eyes fixed on the other's face. Did you have any idea of the relationship between Gladia and Jander? Gramianus said, Are you going to tell me that there was sex between them? Baley said, Would you be surprised if I did? Gramianus said stolidly, It happens. It's not unusual. You can use a robot sometimes if you feel like it. And a humaniform robot, completely humaniform, I believe. Completely, said Baley with an appropriate gesture. Gramianus's lips curved downward. Well, then, it would be hard for a woman to resist. She resisted you. Doesn't it bother you that Gladia would prefer a robot to you? Well, if it comes to that, I'm not sure that I believe this is true. But if it is, it's nothing to worry about. A robot is just a robot. A woman and a robot, or a man and a robot, it's just masturbation. You honestly never knew of the relationship, Mr. Gramianus? You never suspected? I never gave it any thought, insisted Gramianus. Didn't know, or did know but paid it no mind? Gramianus scowled. You're pushing again. What do you want me to say? Now that you put it into my head and push, it seems to me, if I look back, that maybe I was wondering about something like that. Just the same, I never felt anything was happening before you started asking questions.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure. Don't badger me.
I'm not badgering you. I'm just wondering if it were possible that you did know that Gladia was regularly engaging in sex with Jander, that you knew that you would never be accepted as her lover as long as that was so, that you wanted her so much that you would stop at nothing to eliminate Jander, that, in short, you were so jealous that you... And at that moment, Gramianus, as though some tightly coiled spring, held back with difficulty for some minutes, had suddenly twitched loose, hurled himself at Baley with a loud and incoherent cry. Baley, taken completely by surprise, pushed backward instinctively, and his chair went over. 51. There were strong arms upon him at once. Baley felt himself lifted, the chair righted, and was aware that he was in the grip of a robot. How easy it was to forget they were in the room when they stood silent and motionless in their niches. It was neither Daniil nor Giscard who had come to his rescue, however. It was Gramianus's robot, Brundage. "Sir," said Brundage, his voice just a bit unnatural, "I hope you are not hurt." Where were Daniil and Giscard? The question answered itself at once. The robots had divided the labor neatly and quickly. Daniil and Giscard, estimating instantly that an overturned chair offered less chance of harm to Baley than a maddened Gramianus, had launched themselves at the host. Brundage, seeing at once that he was not needed in that direction, saw to the welfare of the guest. Gramianus, still standing, his breath heaving, was completely immobilized in the careful double grasp of Baley's robots. Gramianus said, in very little above a whisper, "Release me. I am in control of myself." "Yes, sir," said Giscard. "Of course, Mr. Gramianus," said Daniil, with what was almost suavity. But although their arms released their hold, neither moved back for a period of time. Gramianus looked right and left, adjusted the smoothness of his clothing, and then deliberately sat down. His breathing was still rapid, and his hair was, to a small extent, in disarray. Baley now stood, one hand on the back of the chair on which he had been sitting. Gramianus said, "I am sorry, Mr. Baley, for losing control. It is something I have not done in my adult life. You accused me of being jealous. It is a word no respectable Auroran would use of another, but I should have remembered you are an Earthman. It is a word we encounter only in historical romances, and even then the word is usually spelled with a J followed by a dash. Of course, that is not so on your world. I understand that." "I am sorry, too, Mr. Gramianus," said Baley gravely, "that my forgetfulness of Auroran custom led me astray in this instance. I assure you that such a lapse will not happen again." He seated himself and said, "I don't know that there is much more to discuss." Gramianus did not seem to be listening. "When I was a child," he said, "I would sometimes push against another and be pushed, and it would be a while before the robots would take the trouble to separate us, of course." Daniil said, "If I may explain, partner Elijah, it has been well established that total suppression of aggression in the very young has undesirable consequences. A certain amount of youthful play involving physical competition is permitted, even encouraged, provided no real hurt is involved. Robots in charge of the young are carefully programmed to be able to distinguish the chances and level of harm that may take place. I, for instance, am not properly programmed in this respect and would not qualify as a guardian of the young except under emergency conditions for brief periods. Nor would Giscard." Baley said, "Such aggressive behavior is stopped during adolescence, I suppose." "Gradually," said Daniil, "as the level of harm that may be inflicted increases, and as the desirability of self-control becomes more pronounced." Gramianus said, "By the time I was ready for higher schooling, I, like all Aurorans, knew quite well that all competition rested on the comparison of mental capacity and talent." "No physical competition?" said Baley. "Certainly, but only in fashions that do not involve deliberate physical contact with intent to injure." "But since you've been an adolescent—" "I've attacked no one. Of course I haven't. I've had the urge to do so on a number of occasions, to be sure. I suppose I wouldn't be entirely normal if I hadn't, but until this moment I've been able to control it. But then no one ever called me that before." Baley said, "It would do no good to attack in any case if you are going to be stopped by robots, would it? I presume there is always a robot within reach on both sides of both the attacker and the attacked."
Certainly. All the more reason for me to be ashamed of having lost my self-control. I trust that this won't have to go into your report.
I assure you I will tell no one of this. It has nothing to do with the case.
Thank you. Did you say that the interview is over?
I think it is.
In that case, will you do as I have asked you to do?
What is that?
To tell Gladia I had nothing to do with Jander's immobilization.
Baley hesitated. I will tell her that that is my opinion.
Gramianus said, Please make it stronger than that. I want her to be absolutely certain that I had nothing to do with it. All the more so if she was fond of the robot from a sexual standpoint. I couldn't bear to have her think I was being a Solarian. She might think that.
Yes, she might,
said Baley thoughtfully. But look, said Gramianus, speaking quickly and earnestly, I don't know anything about robots, and no one, Dr. Vasilia or anyone else, has told me anything about them, how they work, I mean. There is just no way in which I could have destroyed Jander.
Baley seemed for a moment to be deep in thought. Then he said with clear reluctance, I can't help but believe you. To be sure, I don't know everything. And it is possible, I say this without meaning offense, that either you or Dr. Vasilia, or both, are lying. I know surprisingly little about the intimate nature of Auroran society, and I can perhaps be easily fooled, and yet I can't help but believe you. Nevertheless, I can't do more than tell Gladia that, in my opinion, you are completely innocent. I must say, in my opinion, however. I am sure she will find that strong enough.
Gramianus said gloomily, Then I will have to be satisfied with that. If it will help, though, I assure you, on the word of an Auroran citizen, that I am innocent.
Baley smiled slightly. I wouldn't dream of doubting your word, but my training forces me to rely on objective evidence alone. He stood up, stared solemnly at Gramianus for a moment, then said, What I am about to say should not be taken amiss, Mr. Gramianus. I take it that you are interested in having me give Gladia this reassurance because you want to retain her friendship.
I want that very much, Mr. Baley.
And you intend on some suitable occasion to offer yourself again?
Gramianus flushed, swallowed visibly, then said, Yes, I do.
May I then give you a word of advice, sir? Don't do it.
You may keep your advice if that's what you're going to tell me. I don't intend ever to give up.
I mean, do not go through the usual formal procedure. You might consider simply...
Baley looked away, feeling unaccountably embarrassed,
putting your arms around her and kissing her.
No, said Gramianus earnestly. Please, an Auroran woman would not endure that, nor an Auroran man.
Mr. Gramianus, won't you remember that Gladia is not Auroran? She is Solarian, and has other customs, other traditions. I would try it if I were you.
Baley's level gaze masked a sudden internal fury. What was Gramianus to him that he should give such advice? Why tell another to do that which he himself longed to do?